Essentials of Poetics and Indian Literatures. So in this session today, we have four paper presentations and the session would be chaired by Dr. Reema Chowdhary from NMIMS Indore. I would like to introduce Dr. Chowdhary. Reema Chowdhary is Assistant Professor at Narsi Monji Institute of Management and Science, Indore. Her primary areas of research are film studies, digital humanities, and comparative literature. Her focus is on integration of digital humanities in cinema studies. Welcome, ma'am. We are honored to have you with us today, and the platform is all yours now.
Thank you, Ruchi. Thank you for your kind introduction. I would like to thank Professor Nishat for making me part of this conference. It has been really wonderful experience being with her and being associated with her. So I hope I'm audible. Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. So we'll begin with our first presenter. Our first presenter is Tanya Jaluthria. She would be presenting on infusing digital media into theatre in contemporary Indian performances. Tanya is an MPhil, and I guess, she has done her MPhil in the domain of performance studies. I invite you, Tanya, for your presentation. You would be having 20 minutes for your presentation and 10 minutes for Q&A. Our audience can post their questions in chat box. Over to you, Tanya.
Okay. Am I audible, right?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay. So first of all, thank you and good morning. Um, the title of my paper is Infusing Digital Technology into Theatrical Performances. So I just start off. Like all other art forms, theater too has been constantly evolving with the passage of time. And it is in this process of evolution is that any art form survives. So in the contemporary digital age, the intervention of digital media in theater, it was inevitable. Theater, like today's times, has also responded to the needs of the digital world that is driven by technology. It has got digitalized and hence blurring the boundaries and increasing its horizon. In fact, it not only complements the representational form of theater, but it also feeds to it to much extent. This study explores how digital media is not only used for digital technological tools to add to the magnificence of the plays of the visual, but it also serves to be an integral part of the narrative of the play. A majority of contemporary performances focus on interactivity among different art forms in the production, between performers and spectators, between traditional theatre styles and upcoming technology. And this has resulted in the inclusion of almost all kinds of tools that can be modified to fit into the ideological stance of the directors and to fit into the aesthetics of the form of theatre. This paper also looks into the two-way process of how digital media represents theatrical culture, firstly, and then, secondly, archives it by digital preservation. Okay. Digital technology in theater affects the form at the technical level and content at the thematic level. It has indeed helped to add layers to the already existing multimedia art form of theater. Directors have been exploring the digital domain with respect to theatrical performances through the use of projection, telematics, live telecast, highly customized digital lights and sound effects, web camera robots, and even cyborgs. So here, a few of those tools are selected on the basis of their prominence in Indian performances. I will just share my screen now. Hmm. Okay. So I have taken into consideration two aspects of digital media in performance practice in India. First one is theatre incorporating digital media, which has been seen through the plays of Abhilash Pillai and Amitesh Grover, who are both Delhi-based directors. Secondly, the newly emerging form of cineplay, majorly covered in India by the company Cineplay by Subodh Maskara and Nanta Das. The referenced texts are Blindside, Strange Lines, and Sadagar Dishmitare. The digital technological tools that came up in these two domains are projections, digital lighting and sound effects, and camera. These plays are thus read with specific focus on these tools only. Okay. Studies have seen that the 20th century avant-garde movements of futurism, expressionism, as others as major influence on the digital theatrical performances and see them as possible precursors to it. For instance, important to futurism is the centrality of machine. It imagines machines replacing live actors with computer generated images, which is evident in the VR performances, that is virtual reality performances, or robots too, for that matter, in contemporary plays. As of this study, this is evident in Pillai's Blind Side, which I'm talking about. As of expressionism, quoting from Steve Dixon's book, Digital Performance, the pattern of, and I quote, distortion and exaggeration in visual forms is a recurrent practice in digital performances, unquote. Grover's Strange Lines is one such example of this occurrence with the multiple images of fragmented face, which I'll show. Um, then I'll just talk about the plays. So, Blind Side, directed by Abhilash Pillai, it says in the brochure that it is a, and I quote, digital devised performance, unquote. The play is based on the novel Cut, written by Srimoy Piyu Kundu, that traces the life of a theatre artist and his relations with other people. Pillai in the brochure talks of the devising process of the play, quote unquote. While devising the play, we kept in mind that all exercises and improvisations should have a digital intervention or interface. This intervention is made use of to give an immersive language into the performance making and also to explore how time and space is getting challenged in theatre. Unquote. The protagonist Amitabh is seen through other people's perspectives and experiences through the play. We never get to see the actual physical self of the protagonist. That is why you don't see a face in the poster of the play. Okay, this camera is basically the protagonist. You don't see the main protagonist. This camera is that. Okay, this hits a chord in the overall dynamics of theater because Amitabh is replaced by a handy camera that projects live camera recording onto the screen on the stage. So whatever the camera sees is what Amitabh sees, and that is further projected. Like you can see this image, this person dressed in black is a production guy. That is not the protagonist, and he's just carrying a web camera. And whatever the camera is seeing, the camera is, it's as if they're talking to each other, the camera and the character, and it's projected at the back. So, but Amitabh himself physically is never there. Hence, the camera's eye becomes Amitabh's eye. Pillai replaced the live actor with the camera because he wanted to bring a sense of universality to the play, showing that the struggle of Amitabh is the struggle of all theatre artists. This way, Blindside uses digital camera to render the director's conceptual idea as an executed ploy to fulfill his aim. Theatrical performances, when incorporate visuals projected on screen in live theatrical productions, it leads to blurring of boundaries and fudging of art forms. Like this is again the image that the girl is talking to the camera. This is a scene from the play, and the camera, whatever the camera is seeing, that is projected back at the back. So that is what Amitabh is seeing. Okay, fudging on different art forms, like in this picture, because what is presented at the back is a screen image, and this is the live actor sitting with that. Same projections at the back, live people, I mean, doing same holograms. They are basically standing at the back of the screen, which creates a hologram image. This is because the use of screen and projection to create imagery is a domain of cinema, and live stage performances pertains to theater. That is why there is a fudging of art forms. Blindside is adapted from a novel that does not offer the inherent narrative division into breakup of scenes and acts. Hence, Pillai uses projection to demarcate scenes and create a new narrative structure. So, a recurring pattern in the play is that after any scene, a blackout is followed by visuals projected on the screen to show scene change. That includes digital patterns like these one, and circles and etc. So things like that, that actually forecast what the next scene is going to be. Another scene that requires critical attention is Sarla's monologue. Sarla's monologue comes at a point when she's emotionally volatile. Her monologue is projected on the screen, and it is a close shot captured by the camera with no space around her, showing the claustrophobic sense of her existence. As you can see in the picture, it is a very close shot of her. बहुत ज़्यादा focus हो रखा है. This trick, sorry, I'm so sorry for my use of Hindi. This trick is considered notable in the field of cinema to bring out the trapped sense of the characters, coupled with grim lighting and restricted space around, which Pillai brings into theatre. She cries, and while her voice in the projected video increases, the image of her face splits into two, like this one. The image gradually gets more scattered. It literally fragments into bits and pieces, with her shouting and wailing. The digital fragmenting of her face is representative of the fragmentation of her desires and self. Practically viewed, such a depiction would not have been possible to execute on stage with live actors. Moving on to the next, Amitesh Grover's Strange Lines. It is based on When Kulbhushan Met Stockley. It is basically a graphic novel anthology. The form of graphic novel capitalizes on images and illustrations, which is reshaped and duly brought into the theatrical space with the help of live drawing, projection, and live camera. The patterns and visuals that are projected on the screen throughout the play are more than splendid images to please the eye. Those are symbols of Indian and Swiss culture and the problematic societal issues brought forward through the relationship between two pen friends. So it is the very source text translated in digital language, which adds visual imagery to the written narrative of the letters. Thus, digital media maintained a sense of visual art of the source text in the adapted work. It suggests that technology is used strategically to retain yet reinvent to some extent the essence of the source text. In this play, this applies to, and this also applies to Blindside. During the course of this play, they switch positions regularly to sit in front of the camera, showing certain objects or certain body parts, and the close shots appear on the screen. Like you can see in the image, the girl is sitting in front of the camera, and her eyes and almost a very close shot of her face can be seen. The camera is fixed, but the actors play with the frame of its eye by putting only half face in front of it so that the camera captures and projects the partial image of the actor's face, like in this one. Now the man is sitting in front of the camera. The image of this face is multiplied when projected, yet it is an incomplete image. Face is an identifier of our identity, but here what reaches the audience is a split and incomplete face, probably suggesting the incomplete self of the man. Strange Lines encapsulates the vast expanse of the two nations from where the characters are, India and Switzerland. They discuss a variety of issues, and the sense of plurality present in the multicultural nations comes up in the text of the play. And the tools used in the play justifiably deliver this plurality. The camera captures and projects certain objects and images that are inherent to these cultures and nations. There is another sense of plurality in the use of digital technological tools maintained by the Grover. So there's also a sense of plurality in the tools that he uses. He's using a lot of tools. It is like a montage of tools that he's doing in his plays. Uses live camera, live projection, live drawings that show the plurality of the inputs that he uses. Now, with respect to the impact on audience when these tools are used in theatre, as he says, Grover maintains a play between a total immersion and distance on the part of the audience. This purpose is achieved through the combined use of camera and projection that are woven into the narrative. This way, the audience experiences the presentation of work at multiple levels. Sometimes he puts very close shots of the actors, and sometimes he actually defocuses. So the distancing actually gets executed here. In the end, the woman takes up the position of the artist who was drawing live. A camera is fitted onto the drawing table that projects all that is done on the table with a magnified size. So an image that is created out of this technique is that the woman, like you can see, the woman puts her hands over the man's seemingly small head, and using this, she also creates the effect of fire and later snowball. So this small technique actually, multiple interpretations can be taken out of this, and this is just by the virtue of digital media. Again, this could not have been possible using live actors and live. Um, then the audience receives different signals from each element present on stage through the live actor and through the projected video or image in Grover's multi-layered plays. This causes different members of the audience to perceive the elements differently. Grover says, it must be, and I quote, it must be an interaction, a conflict, and sometimes even a contradiction between two or three elements that are present on stage. It introduces democracy of viewing as well. That is only possible if there is no center on stage. Neither technology takes center on the stage nor the performer, but an evolving relationship of conflict, of use, of utility, but also an inquiry into each other. Okay. Then the next point is alternative narratives brought in theater via the camera and in cineplay too. As said by Nicholas T. Proferis in the book Film Directing Fundamentals, and I quote, film is a language used to tell stories, and the narrator of those stories is the camera. Yes, the director is the ultimate storyteller, but the voice she will use is that of the camera. Unquote. Being the narrator, the camera can provide a third person perspective or a bird's eye view that is omnipresent and unbiased and a macro view of the characters, surely. But if the camera is used otherwise, it can bring forth a completely opposite and personal point of view of the characters that would be their first person narrative, subjective and perhaps manipulated. This will give the audience alternate stories at the micro level within the larger story. So these multiple potentials of camera as a narrative tool can add layers to the understanding that the theatrical performances otherwise exhibits. It is not that the camera is just placed in a position, recording and projecting whatever the director seems act, and the actors are aloof from the camera during their performance. Instead, actors gradually go on to make a relationship with the camera. There is an interaction between the actors and the camera because the actors now also respond to the camera. The result is the juxtaposition of the live actor performing on stage and the screen image produced by the camera. So the audience now deals with the cinematic rendering of the live actor and the actual live actor. This suggests that when the camera is inserted into the theatrical space, it presents a play by creating its images within the larger play being performed. Let's talk about the form of cineplay. A cineplay is a piece of art that blends theatre and cinema in such a manner that it would be unjust to draw a line where its theatrical aspect ends and where the cinematic charm takes off. Since it takes from both the forms to much extent, the horizon of its scope and utilities regarding the practical advantages, aesthetics, and styles of both forms increases by an exponential level. In a cineplay, because the final product is in the form of a film, so the larger narrative is of the camera, because in cinema, camera is a narrating tool, as discussed. Hence, a sense of omnipotence is associated with it. But in a cineplay, inside the camera's narrative is the theater's narrative. Therefore, it is two languages, that of theater and of film, two narratives that tell the story collectively, making the storytelling process more enriched because the audience will now have to decode two languages, cinematic and theatrical. Cineplay is basically a rehearsed play which is later shot on camera. So the basic characteristic of a cineplay is that acting style is not purely cinematic. That is, the facial expressions are not the only important way to express for the actor. Instead, the actors are supposed to be expressive through their body movements, gestures, positions, and facial expressions as well. Cineplay takes this from theater, that the actors must make loud gestures to make everything visible to the audience, even to the last benches. Hence, the acting style in a cineplay is to some extent dramatic. Keir Elam in the book Semiotics of Theatre and Drama mentions that Edward T. Hall distinguishes, quote unquote, three principal proxemic syntactic systems about proxemic relations. Firstly, the fixed feature like the theatre, the opera houses, these are the larger structures. Secondly, the semi-fixed features, including movable items, sets, props, lights. Third is the informal proxemic mode that includes relationship between the actors and the audience, and among the audience also. Elam says, and I quote, in the typical Western bourgeois theatre, then the informal and semi-fixed feature, the later two features come under the dominion of the fixed feature, under the first one, unquote. So extending this idea, the cineplay. In the cineplay, these dynamics are flexible and they're constantly changing. The proximity is customized with the help of the camera. Now the audience can enter into the personal space of the actor. But unlike theater, the audience no longer has the obligation to sit at one fixed position and watch the play from that point of view only. Because the eye of the camera will lead to the eye of the so I'm so sorry, because the eye of the camera will lead the eye of the audience in the final product, that is the film. So the audience can be anywhere with subject to change any moment, providing the audience with multiple points of view. So because of technological advancements, a 360-degree view is possible for the audience now, because the camera can go on the stage, it can go even behind the actors and shoot from all possible sides that were not possible in proscenium theater, where the audience is seating with at a demarcated area from separated from the actors. And this feature is invested upon extensively by both the theater directors taken up in the study also. Theatrical performance is captured and then rendered with all the cinematic techniques that cinema bears. With
Tanya, you're left with
cinema
one
comes the
more
benefit.
minute. You're left with one more minute.
Yes,
You're left with one more minute.
one more minute. Okay, okay, then I'll just go to the conclusion. Basically, the changes that occur in the society, they are symptomatic of the changes that occur in the world. So when we see that a lot of digital interventions are evident in theater, it is symptomatic of the fact that digital technology is becoming a prominent figure in the cultural fabric of our life and the human life, basically at a large. Then projection leads to the effect of immersion, and it is basically used to do that. But when projections are used, a contradiction comes at a play. What happens is the opposite of immersion, because the now the audience has to look at the image also, at the back, at the live actors also, and sometimes the audience has to look at both of them. So it is as if the audience is aware what is happening, and the audience is aware of the whole process that is happening in front of them, and the camera is kept in front of them, so it knows that it is a fictional piece. So suspension of disbelief, which was earlier in earlier plays, which used to happen, now there's no such thing like that. Now the audience is distanced. um, and then Suzanne Sontag in her essay puts film and theater, and I quote, films have been rather too often acclaimed as the democratic art, the art of mass society. Theatre, by contrast, means dressing up, pretense, lies. It smacks of aristocratic taste in class society. So often, theatre has been associated with the elites, and masses have been associated with cinema, because cinema sold cheap tickets when it came. But this form of cineplay, what it can do is it can blur these two boundaries between cinema and theater. Now, the working classes can also watch cine plays through the form of cine plays on their phones, just like they do. And ideally, theater should get a boost from the form of cine play also, because whole new market will be opened in front of it, in front of the plays. But by producing and distributing cine plays just like movies, the possible thing is that cineplays might get commercialized just like cinema did, and their quality may get deteriorated in order to aim for higher profits, exactly like cinema.
Okay.
Plays are live
Yeah, please
performances that
wrap
are
up.
kept for a certain.
Please wrap up. We are like,
Can I take just 2 more minutes?
no,
Yeah,
really,
plays are
we can't.
okay. Just half a minute. It is the most important point. It is the most important concluding point.
Yes, you're already exceeding
Um,
your time.
just half a minute, please.
Please conclude.
Otherwise, the paper would be useless.
Please conclude.
Yes. Plays can, yes, thanks. Plays can live for a certain period of amount of time. It cannot preserve itself. Theatrical culture cannot preserve itself. It vanishes with time. But unlike cinema, cinema can preserve itself. And hence, in the larger frame, it can preserve the culture of cinema. And when, with the help of cine plays, theatrical culture can be preserved. It is important for any civilization to collect and archive the cultural practices of its times, and regional theatres carry the immediate cultural traces of any region at the root level. And many don't have access to these narratives. And regional narratives are the core narratives of any nation. So the subsequent aim of this paper was to bring forth the potentials of cineplay, most importantly, this fact that when the theatrical culture will be recorded, cultural practices of people too would be archived and preserved for the masses to have access to regional theatres through digital media. Um, bas. Thanks
Okay, thank you, Tanya.
so
It was
much.
a wonderful, wonderful presentation, and I personally found it really, really interesting. And the floor is open for the question. We have first question from Professor Zedi. She has
Hmm.
appreciated your presentation and your topic which you have presented. She's asking, in what ways
Thank
do
you.
these innovations play with or alter traditional theatre poetics? One, are these inspired by
Play with?
play with or
I
alter
cannot.
the traditional theatre?
Hmm. Hmm.
Are these
Okay.
inspired by Western experiments? If yes, how do they represent Indian situations? Are there any digital tools like web technology also deployed in theatre?
Okay, to answer the first question, traditional theatre, yes, because Abhilash Pillai, like I mentioned, he is mainly from Kerala, and he is actually his original work, his initial work was engaged in Kerala's regional theatre. So, in other of his plays, not exactly in this one, but we do see kind of an intermixing of traditional methods and digital technology too. So, yes, the most what can I say, the optimum use of this technology is to actually mix and kind of phrase what the original narratives wanted to say through traditional media, through traditional techniques, and now say them through digital ones. Because see, the audience is also changing. The audience has become so much used to digital technology that any form cannot stay in its rudimentary form. Any art form cannot stay in that. It cannot evolve. I'm sorry, it cannot survive in it. It has to evolve, and it will evolve. So traditional forms will, it can actually die off. That is why we have lost so many traditional cultures, because they never tried to um, what should I say, people didn't try to evolve it or to open it up to the audiences, and they just got lost with the people.
Uh,
And that is why
Tanya,
in order to
sorry to intervene, Tanya. Just my question was specifically about poetics theater, theater poetics. So it's not necessary that you will answer it right away. You can think about it and move on to the next question.
Yes.
Oh, I didn't hear the
Question,
word politics.
Tanya.
So sorry.
I
Okay.
was okay. Thank you, Tanya. Next question. I was having few of things in my mind which I personally wanted to ask you. One is how these digital theaters are good source of adaptation. When we talk about adaptation, it like goes into the third phase of it. So how that is possible and how fruitful and how much experientially they have been successful in these terms. Are you getting my
See,
question right?
hmm, hmm. The two plays that I have taken up for the study, both of them are adaptations. And your question is relevant to both the plays, basically. That actually, that is what they do, is to take the essence of the source text and then reimagine it through digital vision. That is what they do. And why they do it, of course, they have to miss on some points of the originality. That is the funda of adaptations, that you have to change some things while adapting it from one form to the other. You have to change some things, you have to reinvent some things, and it is purely up to the director to limit what changes are to be done. I mean, this has been a debate in adaptation studies since a very long time. How
Tanya,
much
it
to
has
take
been
from
a very
source?
short of time. I'm sorry I'm interrupting you there itself. We'll move on to this discussion maybe offline. I'll move on to the next presenter. I'll invite Prakruti Maniar. She is pursuing her MA in Digital Humanities from Loyola University. She would be presenting on Purple Pencil Project as a case study of Digital Humanities Project in practice in the field of Indian literature. Over to you, Prakriti.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you to the organizers, and Tanya. Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. It speaks to a lot of the things I'm going to be talking about today, so that's interesting. I'm going to jump right in and share my screen. Everyone can see it and hear me, okay? Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Awesome. So Purple Pencil Project, the title, it's a project first, the paper came afterwards, and it's really, so I'm going to just say the title of the project is Building the Active Indian Literary Database. And it's, as Professor Reema said, presented as a case study of digital humanities in practice. And I'm going to like quickly do a speed through of the website and how it sort of fits into this mold. Before I begin over the project, I feel like it's important where I come from and how I established this project. I speak with an urban bias because a lot of the ideas of the initial sort of what I want P3 to be began in 2015, up until which all I had read in terms of, and I had considered myself a voracious reader. And all I read was English fiction, right? Like even the term literature in my head and I know a lot of my peers in our heads, it used to be synonymous with English Western fiction. As I grew up, yes, there was Arundhati Roy and Salman Rushdie and Jhumpa Lahiri, but it was still very limited. And I had very little exposure to Indian fiction at large, and I mean regional fiction as well. I read in Gujarati and Hindi, but I never read fiction for some strange reason in those languages. And so that was a vague observation I'd made. Cut to 2015 when I was pursuing my MA in English literature, and we had this one semester where we were studying Indian fiction, Indian literature at large. So it was plays, poetry, and fiction. And we read Madhushala and Gulzar. Now this was these are Hindi artists, right, literateurs, and we for some reason read like translated versions of Madhushala, and that's a poem. People at least hear Hindi, even though I don't subscribe to like the Hindi bias of culture in India, but people at least hear Hindi. But we somehow made notes in English. Nobody had like the Hindi version of it. No one read it. We didn't discuss the Hindi words of it. And to me, it seemed really strange that even outside of English, we weren't just engaging with the text outside of its translated form. And even though I'm assuming as Indians, we all speak at least 2 languages. So that was like, it seemed like a little off to me. And what I did, inspired by that, or rather curious by that, was also question my own engagement, where I was like, others aren't, but neither am I reading in Gujarati or Hindi. So I began to sort of look around me to find those books and to say, okay, let me start engaging with it. And I Googled, I went to secondhand bookstores in Mumbai. I went to a public library in Mumbai. And it was a task. I had to literally hunt for books that I wanted. And it was a very deliberate attempt. I found that the Sahitya Academy has a bookstore, and that's a name that will come up a lot in this presentation, because they do a lot of the Indian fiction production of Indian literary works. But that bookstore is tucked away in Dadar, which I don't know how many of you all know in Mumbai, is a very crowded central suburb. And I'm never very happy to go there, but I do. So these questions started forming in my head as to what books are easily accessible, what are the cheapest books, right? Like people are also paying for this stuff. So what's cheap is also going to be accessible to a large audience. How do we discover books? Do we go to libraries and browse? Not so much anymore, I'm assuming. We definitely do it online, and online we don't see as much of Indian literary work. And how does that influence our reading culture, and what does that do to our reading culture going ahead? So this is sort of this flash view of how I came to recognizing that there's a need for a space, whether it was offline, online, we'll come to it, but a space where people could be encouraged to discover Indian fiction. It began with Indian fiction in English, at least. The regional push didn't come on until a little later. But that's how Purple Pencil Project, or P3, as we all internally call it, sort of came to be, to intervene in these gaps of literary production, this supply chain, as I like to call, of stories from the writer to the reader. And so we officially launched in like Jan 2019, which is important because up until then, I didn't even know what digital humanities was. I just had this idea that I was like, why is Indian fiction not as easily accessible? And so that's that. The digital platform was an obvious choice, of course, because what I sort of understood, and I have the verbiage for it now, but I didn't then, but was that people could not access this, access Indian literary works. They were not engaging with it. See, these were all media problems, as I saw it. And I'm also a journalism student, and I was a journalism profession for a year. So these were media problems in my head, right? Like, there's not enough reach, there's not enough publicity of these works. So my inclination was, of course, to go to digital media, to tap into its affordances, to cut through these exact problems of access, of engagement, of publicity, of promotion, of linguists, being able to present dual, like multiple types of content in that one space. So that's how like the website and this basic content package, which any project will have, the website and social media channels came to be, right? This is a snapshot of the website. I don't know how much you can see it. It's not important. We'll be coming to it later. And we have primarily three social media channels. That's Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and Facebook. And so, yeah, that's just, I want to sort of emphasize on the fact that community creation, this engagement bit, it's a commercial term, but I take it very seriously in terms of like, there is a space for us to be multilingual even on social media. And I feel like one of the sessions is going to later talk about it. So I'm excited for that. Now it comes to the crux of the website, which is the website. And on the first glance, it does look like, this is what is just a curated platform. But I've been very deliberate with the choices I made as to the kind of content that would be available here, and why it would be so. So the first thing I want to point out is the book reviews and book lists, and compare it to a landscape scan of the kind of material you otherwise see when you Google for Indian literature. Now there's been a lot of like development in terms of translation and writing about it. But 2 years ago, there were landscape scans, profiles of these old 100-year-old authors about what they did and what they contributed and what kind of literary movements they fostered and pioneered and helped and contributed to, which is important. And I by no means devalue what they do, but reading that article, an article of a profile of an author long dead, I'm not encouraged to either read in my language, which for my purposes, it's Gujarati and Hindi. So any language outside of English, and I'm not encouraged to really pick up their books. And when I am encouraged to pick up that book, I have to hunt, as I experience, really hard to actually find that work. So what I wanted was to make all the content as participatory as possible, and to fill information gaps as where needed and possible in a literary system, right? Like, so we have an article called Independent Bookstores in Your City. My capstone is going to be a map of that, of all the bookstores in India that you can find and support and buy from. Book reviews and book lists, simply because, people consume content that way. The book lists are really popular. Book reviews, again, participatory, right? We're calling readers, we're asking them to read diverse fiction from diverse voices. So again, very conscious decision to have reviews, not just profiles. And as far as possible, I don't think I have any profile on the platform yet. We have like bookstore profiles, yes, about people writing about bookstores which are surviving, just so that they're encouraged to participate in the cycle, right? And not just like passively absorb information. And last, but very important, and this is where the digital humanities conversations begins to come in, right? All of these ideas that I will now say have been developed in the last year as I was studying digital humanities, and I got into like textual studies scholarship and what literature, the role that literature plays in society, like the social function of literature and things like that. And the idea is that if I present all of Indian literature under one platform, could it also help in fostering in the Indian identity in a unified whole? The problem so far, as I've seen, and as I saw in the research also, Indian often becomes synonymous with Sanskrit and Hindi literature. Even if you do a preliminary search of Indian literature, you're going to see Mahabharata and Ramayana, and that is important, but it's not the only thing that makes contributes to the culture of India. So part of the updated conversation, or the continuing conversation, was if it's presented as a whole, if I have everything from Kashmir, don't sing it, to Kanyakumari, and from Nagaland to the west, from the easternmost points to the westernmost points, if the stories of the country are presented as a unified whole, because one does feel at home in all of these stories, regardless of the region and language they come from. Can you also help foster the Indian identity as a unified whole, while respecting and encouraging its multiplicity? So that's one reason why I wanted a website, not just a social media platform like a book blog or a bookstagram, because I don't want to be ephemeral. I wanted to be something that was permanent. So the goal then is to create a multilingual close reader. And I said close reader, so I think obviously the next question would be how it contributes to distant readership. But before that, I just want to show how the first phase, and again, this is pre-digital humanities, did not know that there were plugins available for multilingual purpose, presenting content in more than one language together. But again, making these sites familiar, right? Like there is a Gujarati, and this is Gujarati for those who may not know, but making these different fonts familiar, I don't think, user experience teaches me. If I'm going to make discovering Gujarati fiction a chore, the user's probably not going to do it. I have to search in a different part of the web. Sorry.
You're left with 5 minutes.
I'm seeing 11 minutes on my timer. Am I
at 11? You have to present for 20 minutes.
Oh, yeah. Okay, cool. I'll wrap it up. So the point is that I want to be able to show multiple languages in the same way, not in different parts of the web, which is what tends to happen, at least in my user experience and a lot of my peers. So I spoke about the close reader, right? Like creating the multilingual close reader, because at the end of the day, distance reading, data analysis, all of these things that digital humanities does comes from data. And as Professor Amardeep said yesterday, there's a real lack of digital footprint for Indian works, Indian literary works. So a lot of the content that we create, I'm beginning to see over this last year as data points, right? Today's content, tomorrow's data set. So I'd used this in a previous sort of presentation, that datification is a good form of preservation. If it's online, if it's searchable, it's likely to be discovered and preserved naturally. You don't have to make a special effort to do it. And there is a definite relationship between close readers and distant readership, right? Like people putting their thoughts online right now on particular topics, that's what gets analyzed. So by virtue of creating a diverse content and diverse languages from diverse voices, and repopulating the web, in my opinion, is an important and active step in decolonizing content, which decolonizes digital humanities and selects a snowball effect. So that's really creating the data set for tomorrow by encouraging that sort of plurality and engagement today. And yeah, to make it an active thing, not a static presence. Like digital archives are a good starting point, but until you get people to engage with those archives, it's not going to see like a lot of active growth. It's going to be a static, museumized presence. And there's just a quote from Algorithms of Oppression, really to sum up what I was saying about how the whole idea about repopulating the web, right? Search does not merely present pages, but structures knowledge, and the results retrieved in a commercial search engine create their own particular material reality. Ranking is itself information that also reflects the political, social, and cultural values of the society that search engines operate within. It's just something I feel like sums up what I've been trying to say, and I'm not always very eloquent with it. And I think, yeah, it's the last two bits. In practice, part really comes from the financial stability, because DH is work, TEI, XML, even simple digitizing, it's work, it's labor, it's hours. And the reason why I didn't decide to do this as a PhD thesis, but really treat it as a part startup, part project venture, is to ensure that it's self-sustaining and contributing also economically. Public facing, again, I say the limitedness of academic departments only when it comes to having this broad pan-Indian reach. They're definitely important nodes, but I want to sort of make P3 like a central node in that network, and cut through the divisions of state language and literature departments, although they're very, very important collaborators and will continue to be as we grow ahead. And yeah, to just tap into the commercial value of cultural products. So the scope and challenge is really that, right? People consume culture in a particular way in today's day and age. They take BuzzFeed quizzes on who's your favorite character. They buy T-shirts with favorite slogans of their, shows and stories that they enjoy reading and are part of the canon. So it's really to say, okay, if culture is consumed in such a way, let's infuse our stories, our language, multiple languages in that consumption process. So for that, we've launched a podcast in May. It's called India Booked, which we have events often, which obviously COVID sort of restricted that. We're going to have an awards. We'll be looking for brand partnerships across merchandising, and very importantly, representation and inclusivity, right? Our team currently speaks like 5 languages, reads in as many, 5 to 8, I think. So we're building a team of people who speak more languages, who read in most of those languages, who can be eyes and ears about what's happening in the literary industry of that particular language. So yeah, it's really through collaboration, through community participation that this sort of looks to grow. And I know I really went like a light speed through, but in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up and say thank you. Check Purple Pencil project out. It's 2 years old in its from the day it was literally incorporated, but it's just 1 year old from like where my DH understanding came into sort of align with it. So if you have suggestions, ideas, you want to collaborate, drop me an email, drop me a tweet. I'm really accessible. So yeah, I hope I'm good on time. Thank you, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Yes, you are actually well in time. The floor is open for questions. First, there are a few questions in the chat box, but I'll start with Sango Bidani's comment for you.
Yeah.
Who's written, the point about the influence on our reading culture is very important. And I'm glad that was an important point for you to look at. So this is a comment he has put for you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Who is it?
Sango Bidani.
Yeah, thank you, Sango Bidani. Yeah.
Our next question is from Salwa.
Yes.
He's asking, being able to show multilingual literature online is important. Would you also look at, let's say, oral tradition online in languages that do not have scripts, or if they do have scripts, they might not have technical support? A similar kind of thing, which I was also anxious to know from you. This adds to what Selva has actually said.
So yeah, that's really important. So, and this is something I have been thinking about as to, because so many languages don't have scripts. Yes, they have really good stories, and the reach is wider when it's a hearing thing, because I don't have to bother learning the script either. And we did try to have a YouTube channel where we get authors to read in those regional languages, right? To read the stories out in those languages. So that's one of the biggest challenges, and I could not go through it. But like people, just that people power, that coordinating ability to get that many people to create that content and contribute. And we're not profit making. If we don't make money right now, but if we do, we're gonna like put it back in the business. But one of the challenges is that we don't have that kind of, pan-Indian network reach. Also, it's very difficult to access people when they're in like slightly when it goes to tier 3 and then further sort of towns and cities and villages. So we have to pick up the call, speak in those languages, and which is where the last slide of like creating language ambassadors, creating an advisory board, creating people who speak other languages. So what I want is, if you speak Tulu and even 10 people who would be happy to read on camera those stories, capture these oral traditions, yes, our platform is really open. Just come publish it. So yes, that's part of the agenda, though it's not on priority, because right now we want to create a sort of, we're going like top down, right, from the urban to the rural. So yeah, if that answers your question, yes, it's part of the agenda. Yes, that's a fantastic suggestion. If you want to contribute, you're welcome to.
Okay, there's a question from Professor Zaidi. She wants to ask, what theoretical observation would you draw from your praxis regarding digitization of literatures in Indian languages?
Yeah, my theory is really weak. All of this has been very like, what's the solution? What's the practice part? But I'm going to try and answer it. One of the things because I studied digital humanities in the West, the first lecture itself, it was like, oh, we've moved beyond digitization. And my comment is that, but digitization, because the West did it much faster, right? Like India is still far behind when it comes to even those basic scanning paper and putting it online. Like, I think we just have a lot of that basic work to be done, even though it seems like it's not, doesn't fit within the agenda of digital humanities work anymore. So I feel like that there's this, we have to do that. It's just a slower process. I know we can't jump to all the analysis without actually creating all the data sets. So I feel like there's an element of patience required, that we have like slow down and say, okay, there's all of these languages, none of it is, because how do you even create OCR technologies? How do you do all that if you don't have those basic scans in place? So like digitization is so important, and I don't know how, but like I'm taking a business strategy class next semester, and I hopefully find some answers in creating infrastructure for this kind of work. But yeah, I don't know if this answers this theoretical observations part, but this has been like sort of my understanding of what digitization and literature, like where we are as Indian literature.
Okay. I hope it somewhere answers what Professor Zaidi is looking for. We have one more question from Professor Dhanashree Thorat. She's asking, you mentioned the labor involved in DH project. Could you speak about labor collaboration project partners on the Purple Pencil project?
Yes, that's actually a really good question. I'm going to do like one by one. So first is labor, right? In terms of labor, mine is free labor. I'm a student on a stipend, so somehow it's justified. I justify it to myself. My partner, Saurabh Garg, he's the one who pays for everything we do. And again, his is technically, it's not labor, but he's just giving money right now at the moment, because he really believes in this project. We have one operations manager whom we pay. All our reviewers we pay, although it's a really ridiculously token amount. Just covers the cost of, like, it's not covers the cost. We give them the books, but it's equivalent to the cost of the book. So that's the labor that's being done. If I have to expand beyond this point, I will have to find out that, which is why like I have to make it public facing, which is why merchandise, which is why sponsorships, which is why awards, because all of this, even if I have to go to a library and say, I'm going to spend like 20 days here and digitize everything, I'm still going to have to sustain myself for those 20 days, even if I do it myself. So there's massive amounts of labor. We don't know how to fund it except to follow these commercial practices of merchandise, like whatever I've been saying so far. Collaboration is so important, but the unfortunate thing is I'm stuck in the US for this next 6 months at least. So for the last, I've had my best ideas since I came to the US, because I was introduced to digital humanities in such a like burst of scale, and not just like a small mention in one part of the syllabus. But I've been really hand-tied because timing difference, just distance, physical distance, COVID. So collaboration, yes, like global. My dream is to really be in touch with every language department in India, every literature department in every college, or at least like each state university. I would love to do that, and I'm really, really waiting to do that come June, July when I'm back. So like everybody, like partnership is so important because no one person or no one company can really be representative of the cultural diversity of India. It has to be just by its nature, it has to be a collaborative effort. Otherwise, we're doing injustice to our purpose. And project partners, they aren't very different. Current collaborations are, I'm assuming collaborations will turn into partnerships. Right now, they're mostly publishers, right? Because they're the ones who give us books, they tell us what's happening in the literary world. And again, we don't charge them money because we understand independent publishing is a tough job in today's climate. So yeah, I hope that that answers all three questions. Yeah.
We can take one more question if we have. One of the curiosity which was there in my mind was, Prakruti, how do you look at the collected material being digitized and its own preservation? Like if you keep on collecting, you said you are quite keen to collect all the data, but how do you plan to preserve the digitized material then?
Yes, I'm going to need a tech partner for that, because while we've been introduced to minimal computing, I mean, when it began, we used WordPress, and that's really like, it's a bulky site. It's a bulky process to have WordPress and anything for anything. So I do not have plans for that, but I have a note almost every quarter. I have a note that says, find a way to have figure out how to build storage capacity for these kind of things. But my sense is that even in this case, partnership is going to come into the picture, and collaboration is. What I'm thinking of is creating a model which can, like deploying a product. Instead of me or Purple Pencil Project being the one that stores all the data we digitize, creating either a process or a product which like how plugins, you create a product and then install it in every sort of computer, right? A software, a piece of software, every machine. So my sense is, if there's a way, and this is something I read and deliberate about, but I haven't yet got an answer, and haven't had real serious discussions with anybody from the tech world. But my sense is that it won't be one person. Even the storage has to be distributed in some way, like very democratic storage and generation of this kind of data, because it's nearly impossible to store all of Indian literature.
Early to answer this for you. Let's thank you so much, Prakruti, for your presentation. It was really interesting, and I could see some of the appreciations also there in the chat box. I would now invite our next presenter, Salwa Kazi. He's MA Linguistic, Deccan College, Pune. He will be presenting on functionality of multiple language support on social media platforms. Over to you, Salwa.
Hi, I'll start sharing my screen. Okay. Hi, so just a clarification, my pronouns are she, her.
Yeah, sorry for that, because yeah.
All right, so the title of my paper is The Functionality of Multiple Language Support on Social Media. Just a quick explanation. I use the word functionality because I want to explain whether linguistic support online meets the needs of its user base. So whether it is answerable to its functionality, that's what I'm trying to explore here. I'll take you through the presentation outline. Yeah, so I'm gonna walk you through the introduction, then the data collection, then the discussion of the paper, limitations and scope, conclusion, and finally we have the 10 minutes for the Q&A. Let's introduce what this is all about. As we all know, India is a multilingual country, and its user base online is also multilingual. So we have almost 26% of the Indian population as multilingual, and a large chunk of it is online. However, you do not find that reflection of multilingualism in linguistic support online. As you can see in the screenshot I've attached to the side, there are a few Indian languages in this language support packages given. This is a screenshot from Twitter, I believe. So you can see English, Hindi, you can see Marathi, you can see Kannada, but there is no Konkani. For example, I'm a Konkani speaker and that's not available online. So the accessibility to the digital world is usually afforded to people who speak majority Indian languages, and that too, not all of them. So TikTok, for example, one of the most downloaded applications in India before its ban, had only 15 Indian languages available in its linguistic support, whereas I guess we would say the bare minimum would be the 22 scheduled Indian languages, but even that was not available. There is a responsibility that social media platforms should have to ensure equal access to all language speakers. And this is where you realize that the language social media platforms are targeting language speakers who come with numbers. So they would look at majority language speakers and provide services to them because they come with the number and the power of numbers. So the privilege of speaking these standard majoritarian languages intersects with the privilege of having access to digital media and social media. And that's why the language support online is very selective in nature. There is only support for most majority or most state recognized languages. And that's the problem here, because the same can be said of language policies offline. Let's say language policies by the government that mostly privileges and supports the 22 scheduled languages, whereas we have hundreds of other languages in India that do not receive any support either online or offline. So this is, I guess, the problem. And so I'll present my research question, that what are the language choices being made by multilingual Indian speakers on social media? And does the availability of multiple language options make platforms more accessible to minority language speakers? And this is very important because most social media platforms are very happy to announce that they have language support packages and multiple language options on their platforms, but does that really make a difference? This is what I'm trying to explore, and I hope I don't come off as someone who's assuming that it doesn't help. So let's take a look at what users have given me as answers. Now, in order to get my data, I would have definitely preferred to go physically and interview people. However, because of the pandemic, that was not possible. So I created a Google form questionnaire, which included these questions, demographic details, a consent sign, which explained that their responses will be used in my research, multiple choice questions about language choices on social media to make it easy, but also descriptive questions about the impact of language support, which gave me more qualitative answers. And of course, I took the help of a lot of literature to review, to analyze all the data that I have. Okay, so I'll take you through the discussion or the analysis part of my paper. One is just explaining that the Indian internet user base is very much multilingual. As you can see, there is a screenshot from my form attached. When asked the question, are you multilingual? 92.9% people said yes. So that I of course asked them what languages they use, and they came up with a variety of Indian languages, not just majority languages like Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, Gujarati, Marathi, Kannada, but also minority languages like Sylheti, Golpadiya, Palakkad variety of Tamil, Kolhapur variety of Marathi, Konkani, Kokani, Tulu, etc. So there was quite a range of responses from the responders. However, what is important is that English was a common factor, like among the languages that all the responders spoke, they all spoke English. So that was the major common factor that I'll get into soon. One of the responders I had the chance of physically meeting, and I talked with her about language attitudes. So this is a narrative I'll quickly explain. Responder FH says that she has a friend who keeps correcting her Marathi and said that this Savarna friend corrects her Marathi and keeps pointing out that she's speaking wrong Marathi, which is why she has completely stopped speaking Marathi because her Marathi is not standard enough, correct enough, good enough for her friends. So she has completely given up on Marathi and she said that it affects the idea of who she is. That's something that was very difficult for me to wrap my head around because the amount of marginalization you face in real life also is the kind of these are the kind of language attitudes that affect your language choices. And this also explains the potential harm of standardization and the potential harm of prescriptivist attitudes towards minority language speakers online and offline. So that's where we go into what are the language choices being made online. So I mostly got two responses. I had, two important questions to ask. Is your language supported on social media? And as you can see, a large portion of people said yes, it is supported. Probably because most of them do speak English and one other majority Indian language, again, because of our schooling system, where state languages are taught in most schools, and because of the three language policy in India. So most people do speak majority languages in India. However, despite having language support in social media, when you ask them, have you tried using any Indian language on social media? Majority of them say no. And I just asked them, have you tried? So have not even tried is the majority. And you can take a look at the reasons. The first reason given by a Tulu speaker was that their first language was not available online. Tulu does not have any technical support online. Then other speakers said the translations are too mechanical or too technical. So it's really difficult for them to understand the kind of language being used online. There is a discrepancy between the language used every day and the language support on social media. And of course, as you know, standardized state supported majoritarian prestige varieties are available online, which brings me to the question, whose language is called the standard and whose language is supported online is clearly a matter of privilege and a matter of sociolinguistic privilege per se. So this definitely is affecting people's language choices. Like despite, for example, I am a Marathi speaker. I am also a Konkani speaker, but I know the majority Marathi language, but I would not choose Marathi online because it's clearly not the Marathi I speak. So that's where, even though there is the option isn't for me. And that is why majority people use English online, also because majority people in my questionnaire specifically know English. As you can see, the medium of instruction in school for all my respondents, almost 74% was English. And asking people, why do you choose English online? The answers given is that first, it's a habit because they started using social media in English, and now switching over to the Indian language option was not easy. There was clearly an assumption that the digital can only be navigated in English. This was a very important narrative where the respondent told me that it never occurred to her that there could be Indian languages or languages other than English online. And she says that it also seemed that this is the only language in which such functions would exist. So, this assumption that we grew up with, that whatever is new, modern, digital, social media related has to be in English. And it's really difficult to even imagine. And as you can see, it's really difficult to put into practice, despite the kind of um, monetary power that social media platforms have. They have not been able to put this linguistic diversity and ease of access into practice. So you can see that there is definitely the linguistic privilege that English speakers have, because um, only speakers who speak English were able to, let's say, access my questionnaire. I speak English, so I can write about me being a minority language speaker. I can theorize, I can make questionnaires, I can go on and express all my problems, etc. online. But the same cannot be said for people who do not have access to English. And this also brings me to a very important critique of the new education policy. So, the new education policy is pushing for multiple language support policies in real life. So, they are pushing for using Indian languages in schooling and giving more, promoting more of Indian and local languages. However, Sonavne points out in a very important way that who gets to learn English and who is forced to learn Indian local languages is a very important question, because government policy will affect government schools and government colleges. It will not impact private schools and private colleges. So people with more money, more privilege will still be able to access English, because at the end of the day, just having language policies at the level of education and maybe this kind of minimal multiple language policy on social media is not going to be very helpful, because um, the same kind of support will not be there in other domains of life. So you might come from a Marathi medium school, which a lot of my respondents do come from, but at the end of the day, they have to learn English to be online. At the end of the day, they have to know English to get a job, to write a resume, etc. So just having language support in education does not make much of an impact, because in real life, English always has more privilege. That is also something that we need to think about and put into practice. So, the impact of language support in media, efforts to privilege one variety over others, reduces the domains in which minority languages can be practiced, which might lead to language loss. So, this is something that I have personally experienced, because I studied Marathi in school and I was always surrounded by Marathi language speakers. My variety of Marathi spoken at my home was the only domain in which I could practice my language. And slowly, as I moved out and went ahead, it's very difficult to keep in touch with my language. That's because the domains in which I can practice my language have just disappeared, which might lead to my future language loss, because I just don't have anyone to speak my language with. And that's still a related language to Marathi. I don't know, I definitely cannot imagine the kind of language loss and disconnect people who speak really different linguistic varieties experience. If the digital world does not make space for the multilingual individual, what will be its impact on the survival of linguistic diversity? This is a really important question that I thought about. That, for example, the influence of standardization offline can easily be felt. uh, like the repercussions are huge and have been felt for almost more than a century. You can see research being done a century ago by, let's say, the LSI, Linguistic Survey of India, other ethnographers and anthropologists, where the standardization in official work, government work, has affected people's linguistic choices back then. And now, since digital media is such an important part of our life, social media is such an important part of our life, that uh, having such kind of standardized varieties available will definitely affect the kind of language practices we have every day. So, if we do not make space for multilingualism or linguistic diversity, it's going to have a very detrimental impact on the survival of said diversity. As you may know, UNESCO ranks India as the country with the highest number of endangered languages. And if we keep considering social media as the equalizer or as something that makes things easier for people, makes everything accessible for people, then we also need to think about language policy and how it affects people's choices. There's a quote from a report by Google where it says that 60% of Indian internet users stated limited language support and content to be the largest barrier for the adoption of online services. This clearly shows that a majority of Indian internet users are facing issues because of limited language support. I'll start concluding. Just a second. Data, I'm just going through some of my limitations because I wrote this paper and did my research in a very short amount of time. So my data is limited and can be expanded with more participants. The questionnaire should definitely include some more qualitative questions, which I realized after I started analyzing a lot of my data. Again, my questionnaire was entirely in English because of the short amount of time I had. Translations will make it more accessible, and I hope to do that in future. While the analysis of my paper focused on user experiences, analyzing language policies of the platforms will definitely provide necessary insight. And I'll conclude my presentation by saying that language support provided by most popular social media platforms is not representative of the needs of a diverse user base. This kind of policy can have a detrimental impact on the survival of sociolinguistic diversity, and accessibility to social media is a pressing issue faced by Indian users, which can be remedied by making a sociolinguistically informed policy, which will bring accessibility a step closer. So, thank you so much, and I hope I'm not over time. I'll take your questions now.
Thank you, Salwa. You were indeed well in time. There's one question from Professor Thorat. Um, she is commenting, Salwa, love this point you are making that major social platforms are language choices, but the choices themselves are constrained and fall within the dominant norms. I'm curious about what you see as possible intervention here as a humanities scholar. Reaching out to these platforms, white papers on the topic, and the alternative platforms.
Yes, again, really good question. Reaching out to these platforms definitely sounds like a good idea, but I think um, white papers, alternative platforms, actually, right now, having alternative platforms is definitely a good idea. However, we have to think that to the common person, having alternative platforms might not bring in the ease of access we think it will bring. For example, now that we have, let's say, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, three really major media players, and if we say let's come up with an alternative platform that is more representative of language needs, a common person will still prefer to go on these major media platforms because that also gives them a bigger audience, a bigger marketplace if they are into selling something, etc. So we cannot completely just do away with major platforms because of the power they hold, which in itself is quite problematic. I understand, but probably holding them accountable in terms of their language policies, in terms of hiring decisions. Who are they hiring to make language policies? Who is making the AI for this language support packages? Which companies are being contracted? These are questions that need to be asked directly to these platforms. And I think that's like we all need to hold them accountable because their power comes from us in numbers. So I hope I answered that.
Thank you. Um, uh, Professor Zedi has commented, I agree multilingual questionnaire would add to the perspective of what you are looking for. And Professor Dhanashi have said thank you to you. And I just wanted to add to what you're already being stating. Yes, it is very important to have that accountability being given to the people who by and large actually put these data or make these platform accessible to all of us. So I think somehow the other way, we are the one who have been putting all these things, and we should be the one who should be accountable for this kind of accessibility, because we are by and large the population who have been accessing the social media platforms in English. So to say, as you have stated, the socially privileged language. So this is just I wanted to add from my side. Still, if we have some more questions, we can take. We have some time. No. Okay, so in that case, we can move on with our next speaker. Our next speaker of this session, and maybe last speaker of the session, is Devika Shekhawat. She is PhD. She's doing her PhD from Ambedkar University, Delhi. Devika would be presenting on the Digital-Jhumur folk song, Memory, Migration, and the Digital. Over to you, Devika.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, Devika.
Yes. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, Devika, you are on.
All right. So, warm good morning to everyone. And I'll be presenting my paper on encountering the digital-Jhumur folk songs, memory, migration, and the digital sphere. So, when I speak of Jhumur folk songs, what I essentially in that way mean is the kind of folk song or folk music of the tea plantation community in Assam. Then and how the songs kind of carry memory of migration, and how there's a sense of community and the different thematics of life in the tea plantation that are captured in in the Jhumur folk songs, and how the Jhumur folk songs essentially also work songs and also festival songs, and how different themes of love, intimacy, work, relations, community relations, all of those different thematics are captured in this in Jhumur folk songs, especially the memory of migration, where kind of colonial history mars the life of tea plantation workers, and how that finds articulation in Jhumur music and Jhumur songs, and how in today's time there's been a certain kind of existence of that song, and how there's like we've been talking about kind of digital footprints and digital archiving and different streaming sites, so how it's finding its space in the digital realm, so as to speak in today's time. So to start off, I would like to first talk of the history that is there, that we've talked about with regard to the tea plantation workers in Assam. So there's a long history in which where as in Assam, especially during the uh, different 18th and 19th century, huge areas of Assam uh, were kind of cleared up, and the land was cleared up, and the tea plantations were set up, and a British planter had actually written in one of his biographies where he says the romance of Assam is a romance of commerce, the history of a savage country brought under civilized rule through cultivation by alien labor of a single product. And this was written in 1906 by a European traveler. And different complex processes of colonialism, imperialism, and kind of disposition and circulation of global capital, exploitation and resistance, and even local cultural formations and contestations are all what make up today's Assam, the brewing Assam cup of tea, where vast areas of virgin forests were cut under different wasteland acts of 1838, and with the official discovery of tea in India, which actually locally grew to a height of 30 meters, but then because there had to be production value created out of it, with different experimentations and production dynamics, it was made to kind of go through a height of a bush height, a height of a bush, which is which is to a human's kind of waist length, and which makes it easier for people to pluck it. But what would remain important was they needed a strong labor force, as the uh, the the Kachari and Naga labor had refused to work in the plantations, and the British officials often kind of have asserted that they were lazy or opium addicted. So to control labor, they actually brought in a lot of labor from the so-called labor catchment areas of Chota Nagpur, the Chota Nagpur plateau area, which is present in Orissa, parts of Bihar, Jharkhand, and even parts of Bengal in some areas. And this continued for almost a century, whereby different networks of legal or paralegal and even illegal agents and middlemen, in which whom in the Jhumur songs have been called the Joduram, have kind of engaged in various nefarious forms of coercion and outright violence, which kind of brought the migrant labor into the tea plantations. And kind of Assam has also seen migration of different communities such as Nepali and different tea tribes in recent formations that have come together, which have formed Assam's social cultural terrain. And the tea garden community, which composed of 100 kind of sub-tribes, have added a new dimension to the cultural landscape of the region. So the culture and livelihood of tea plantation workers and tea tribes, from whom the word Jhumur folk song comes, have a rich and dynamic existence in terms of even religion, language, songs, dance, rituals, and the numerous customs that are associated with this kind of music. In this context, the Jhumur folk culture can be perceived as a composite culture. And so it is the wonderful kind of folk music repertoire that has grown around it. Though the term Assamese folk music refers to a single, obviously kind of identifiable phenomena, but it is marked by a certain kind of diversity contributed by various groups and communities and that have come together to form to kind of live in this region. And the regional diversities in music traditions also have lent an elusive that kind of dimension to Assamese folk music as well. So Jhumur folk songs represent a astonishing variety and reflectivity of the kind of multiple expressions and different heterogeneous elements which intermingle kind of very harmoniously. They reflect the tribal and ethnic influences and also a hint of affinities with cultures and which might have been a result of socio-cultural and religious exchanges and social ties. The kind of different aspects have come together to kind of give a very lively feel to this song. So Jhumur as is also a very famous dance form of Assam is called Jhumur Nach, which is mainly performed by T-Types community during the autumn season, which is to take a break from the daily schedule. So during festivals and different kind of community gatherings, it is or any form of celebration, it is performed, which a very lively part of Assamese folk culture tradition. And songs and remixes have been released every other year of the Jhumur songs. So right now, if as Durga Puja or even the Diwali celebrations and Kali Puja celebrations kind of happen in the past month of November, the entire area was reverberating with different songs, which were Jhumur songs, but were also like 80s, 90s Bollywood music, to even different kind of aspects of Bhojpuri music was also there, and the different remixes of similar old songs that can be found. So there's a very famous cultural activist of the 1960s. By many of us might know them by the name of Kalidas Gupta, and he's kind of collected and sung different songs. And when he would travel, and he was a part of the India's independence struggle, and also talked of the working class people, and he's looked at this kind of folk music as a community's music also, and he's also seen it as a scope of resistance music, because the kind of themes that the songs talked of, the kind of colonial exploitation and oppressive mechanisms of living in tea plantations. So he's actually extensively collected Jhumur songs and kind of sung them, and there's a strong digital kind of archive, which has a where there's the different websites which have actually kind of shown the work he's done, and have recordings of him singing the songs as well, which is actually a great source of archive of the kind of Jhumur music in its original tracks, which has been sung by him and recorded over the past few years. So and he's also looked at it as even work songs, and many people have also understood it in terms of work songs. And if you're traveling across, if you're living in tea plantations, especially during the plucking seasons when the workers are plucking the tea leaves, you would often find the women singing these songs, which kind of forms a sort of camaraderie or a sort of rhythm with which the songs are kind of sung. They are created or sung by workers with an intent of increasing their efficiency or timing of work and bring about a steady work pace in itself. And the sense of community and togetherness is also comes together with the songs. So as and to now to, if one looks at a few of I've taken a few examples of these songs, the three main songs which I've looked into, which also makes have also different kinds of digital uh, kind of a footprint, if one would want to say. So there's one song which has been collected and kind of sung by different cultural activists. There's this song called Ranchi Se Bhejer Kuli. From Ranchi was sent the Kuli. So I've also kind of done the translation of the song in my paper as well. And the second song is a very famous song which a lot of people kind of associate Assam with, and a number of artists have kind of anyone and everyone has kind of respun the song. You would find the song on local TV channels being sung to different kind of indie artists creating remixes and tunes out of it, to even at a protest site in Assam, or even in Delhi, people singing this song. The song is Cholmini Assam Jabo. So you would actually find it translates to Come Mini, let's go to Assam, which kind of talks of the different kinds of exploitative mechanisms that the workers were brought to in the tea plantation, but also the entire journey where there was a promise, the promised green land of Assam, where they would get to be and work. But the Joduram, which is the middleman, the singer says the middleman has kind of tricked us and brought us here where there's extreme hardship. Someone has to go and buy food, someone has to go and buy some oil to cook, someone goes by the river to catch fish, and if you're lucky you might go to the trader, the Marwari trader shop, and get something to eat. So this kind of the very repeated line which then gets translated is Sardar bole kam kam, Babu bole dhoriyan, Sahib bulibo piter chal, Hai Joduram, Phaki dia, Cholai dia sam. So it says that the Sardar says work, work. The Babu says catch them and bring them back, as in if they try to run away, bring the workers back. And the Sahab says kind of beat them and whip them up. So they curse the middleman or the Joduram that you Phaki dia, as in you tricked us and brought us to Assam. There is kind of there are different lines in the song which talk of the hardship. If we have more songs, more time, I can actually kind of recite the song and the translations as well. So, and this song is kind of brings together different aspects of workplace relations and the kind of history and memory of migration. It's a very famous song which has been, as I mentioned earlier, sung and resung by different artists. So one very kind of important line on how it becomes the identity of the kind of tea plantation workers as well. And then we move on to a very kind of famous song called which from the 1970s, which is from the 1975 Assam 1975 national award winning film called Sameli Memsap, and the song is Assam Dese Bagi Sare Swali. So which is very interesting because it revolves around the love story of a British tea plantation manager and a tea garden worker, and the film brings to the forefront. And this song also has a visual aspect attached to it, and you would find it on different streaming sites as well. The song and the film as well. So the film brings together the forefront the complex historical dynamics and forces that have come to characterize the female labor in plantations. The video is a very famous kind of song of the song that is Assam Deshe Bagisa Riswali. And the Samili, who is the protagonist of the film, is seen with long black flowing hair dancing in joyous kind of abandoned glee. And she marks a difference as Samili from the Hindu name Lakshmi. So in the song, she again and again says that my Lakshmi Nahai Mure Naam Sameli or Sompa Nahai Mure Naam Sameli. So she's kind of marking herself that my name is Sameli and not Chameli or Lakshmi, as the kind of the people, the British Sahab or the Babus who are generally from Bengal or from different Hindi speaking areas have called her. So she points to the complexity of her history and location, where she has never been to the land, where she also in the song says that she's never been to the land of her ancestors, and she doesn't know where they come from, but she does remember and experience the brutal surveillance and violence of the planter Raj. She reiterates that in the last lines of the songs. Of the song that have been taken, actually this last paragraph of the song has been taken from the popular Jhumur song Cholmini Assam Jabo, where it's this line which says Sardar says work, work, Babu says catch them, and oh Joduram, you tricked us. So this kind of song, that song Cholmini Assam Jabo's last paragraph has found itself in this kind of very uh, popular kind of Asmi's song as well, which kind of was a mainstream song as well, which even many academics have analyzed and written extensively on. So the song beautifully captures the history of migration, as Samili sings that she does not remember where she comes from, but finds herself in Assam and calls this her Bagisare Desh, or that is her where she lives. And and the song erases a specific it kind of brings together the specific context of Assam tea plantation and the process and mechanisms of surplus labor extraction which of women tea plantation workers, even though it retains Samili's assertive manner where she time and again clarifies her name, but it does not kind of really bring to or captures the essence of the exploitative workforce relations. And many a times the history of the kind of colonial experience is often remembered in a lot of kind of archival texts, or even colonial archives, to even a lot of authors have extensively written about it, from Amalendu Guha to Rana Pratap Behal, who have actually written books and books on different kind of the colonial history of tea plantation workforce and the entire kind of economy, the global economy. But here, as you find from the local formations of the folklore and folk songs, and even a lot of oral traditions of even remembering the history. There's if once you even actually go and talk to the different folklore groups, there's the kind of remembrance of that history as well, even though it's remembered with a little sense of harshness as well. But that kind of memory of that history and that global sense of colonial and indentured labor experience kind of finds articulations in songs and in different folklore and aspects of oral kind of traditions, and even memory of that lives on till date as well. So now, as we've signed that these oral tradition have lived on in the present day and age, kind of authorship and circulation and distribution and even performances of Jhumur music has continued to shape memory and identity. But there are different dynamics in the realm of the digital, as Jhumur music has begun to find its place in the kind of digital and electronic music and even remixes. And there remains a complexity of an implication of implicating kind of intermingling Jhumur song and music with kind of popular culture and digital archiving in the way that Jhumur has taken shape as a popular folk culture of Assam as well, with traditional and contemporary cultural significance of tea plantation worker community, which kind of such intermingling also, how does it, what I was thinking about, how does that kind of bring together the complex history? Does it carry forward that kind of complex history? What are the paragraphs that are then removed? What kind of lives on? So as you would find, the first song that we talked of kind of has different websites which have collected Kalidas Gupta's work, and thus they have, so that you'd find the song Ranchi Che Bhejer Kuli in those kind of frameworks. And Cholmeni Assam Jab also then is a very popular kind of Jhumur song as well, which different artists and different folklorists and different kind of even very popular uh, uh, popular kind of figures like Bhupen Hazarika and from Assam has actually sung that song. And lastly, if we come to the song Akham Dese Baki Sare Sali, which is composed, the music has been composed by Bhupen Hazarika, and of course it has the kind of different remixes, and different people have covered that song. So different new age artists from Assam have actually covered the song as well. And that has also kind of shaped a public memory or public understanding of the women tea plantation worker, even though in a very fragmented and kind of essentially and racialized manner. But it does find a, a particular kind of resonance with a kind of identity marker as well. But when we're seeing with increasing digitization, there's been where with different streaming sites coming in the forefront, a lot of Adivasi youth and people who are from the tea plantation community actually singing and more often remixing songs. So there's this very interesting kind of experience of in Golaghat. There's this young boy by the name of Ankit, and he kind of whom I used to know because we used to play together when we were kids, and he's from the tea plantation community, and he's been kind of taking out remix music and Jhumur music, and some of them are and some of them, not him particularly, but some of these remixes are kind of remixes of old Jhumur songs, but most of them are kind of new Jhumur songs which talk of the thematic of love and kind of intimacy remains the same, and complexity of nature and flora and fauna and of life in tea plantations kind of finds articulation in even in these digital kind of remixed folk songs, which are often kind of which they make and often put in different social media sites or like Facebook, or and of course when TikTok was very famous, a lot of these new age kind of Jhumur songs which are now very interlinked with Asmi's music as well. So kind of that there's been a kind of digital intermingling of the kind of genres as well. So a lot of TikTok videos would be made on that kind of on Jhumur music and the different aspects and the different thematics. So within within the 30-second window, we try to capture a story of life within the tea plantation along with that kind of Jhumur music as well. So when we come to kind of looking at the history of memory and how how Jhumur music lives today in the digital age, and once the different the Jhumur as it the socio-economic and cultural politics in the history of migration of tea plantation workers through people's stories and folk tales and music and dances and its place in the digital as it's coming forth is an attempt in the production of knowledge of voices and narratives that the mainstream history and contemporary hegemony kind of silences, while acknowledging the different difficult questions of representation as well, and the reality and the ethnic kind of construction of marginalized narratives that entail in Jhumur music and Jhumur songs. The Jhumur songs and the new tracks that come out every year continue to be played during festivals and puja pandals and tea plantations, and often played alongside, like I'd mentioned, kind of Bollywood music or Asmis and Bihu songs, contemporary popular Bhojpuri music, and even specifically Bollywood music from the 90s, 80s, and 1990s. The different socio-economic and political forces and dynamics that produce the fractured positionality of the tea plantation worker in Assam find voice even in the new remixed and digital tracks of Jhumur music. They remain to be an exercise in reconstituting and imagining and producing an understanding of the past in a process of engagement with Jhumur songs of the digital realm. The internet and digital archiving in online realm operates at a space of continuity of the oral narratives, and the remix, along with the digital realm, brings about a new change in how the song is circulated and perceived as well. And exactly how that is perceived and how it circulates within an ever widening audience as memory unfolds to different ruptures in the social and cultural realm is of something which is ever changing. But what remains interesting is that the songs do survive the test of time and are reworked and even remixed in that digital realm as well. And remixes of Jhumur song or the work of digital and electronic music has changed the terrain of digital archiving and how the songs are produced and circulated on different streaming networks, even local television channels and online sites and the new age social media. As the song circulates with a new fervor, it is difficult to unravel how the music is perceived and its kind of how its meaning and message gets transferred. But Jhumur music speaks of the community, the flora, fauna, love, livelihood, work, and even at times resistance. But the electronic digital realm even produces newer songs or similar varying themes which find a space not only in the digital archives, but also in different celebrations and festivals. The digital space itself is rapidly transforming, as we all would know and have been discussing so far as well. And so is the modes of communication and circulation, where the audience also has a strong space of interaction with the option of commenting on videos as well, and re-uploading various remix versions of songs and music. So this change has allowed a new voice to the audience and has brought the audience into the mix as well. This kind of is interesting as it allows the digital medium to be an important part of the realm of oral tradition that Jhumur folk music has been a part of. For the longest time, folk music has been an important part of oral history, passing on history culture from one generation to another as it picks up from different ruptures as time keeps passing by. The very tradition and culture of remixing that actually finds itself in continuation with folk music and especially Jhumur songs of the community of tea plantation workers is a very important part of the oral tradition and narrative kind of linked experiences and memory of the history and culture. Remixing and digital archives that we see today might be seen and understood as a particular phenomena unique to the present time. But however, a deeper look into the genre signals towards a fundamental shift on how we look and understand contemporary music as a commodity or a product produced by artists, but shifts the terrain it has shifted towards a terrain which is kind of the creation itself becomes a process where the kind of audience is also speaking back the one song but different kind of artists are covering it or different artists are remixing it, so that there's been a certain kind of the folklore process of remixing is also a process of folklore where the remix culture of the 21st century has now that has also been argued by different writers that a communal way of experiencing art and kind of intellectual creations and a sense of mass ownership of the creation where different people can take up the song and kind of do different things with it. And different streaming sites and portals which have come up in the past decade like YouTube have opened the space for the audience in the process of music to come closer in the digital realm, giving it a particular nature of folk remixing in that sense. So many Jhumur songs find themselves remixed or digitally produced, and the different themes of love, community, intimacy, flora and fauna of a region, history and memory are often captured in these new remixes. The continuation of Jhumur music as that of memory and community finds space in the archiving of these Jhumur music, the new remixes and the new digital productions. Author Catherine McDonald has discussed how folk process as a process by which cultural artifacts are changed, whether like mildly or in a substantive manner, to form a new cultural product. And the multiple renditions of the Jhumur song, which we've talked about, like the song Chol Mini Assam Jabo, which has for half a century been remade and adapted multiple times by multiple artists with different renditions or different tones, and making a mark in mainstream music in Assam, has reworked its way into the digital folk process. As the song artifact itself changes in the digital realm, and the digital culture also itself changes and widens, where tribal communities from tea plantations of Assam now are also finding a space for expression and articulation. In such a context where the digital comes to so close to the musical kind of the musical personhood, uh, the kind of electronic media enriched has kind of enriched our musical world, and our music enriches our new technology as well, and the lives of those who kind of use it. Though we do not we do need to remind ourselves every now and then that, and which we can actually discuss further, and I would love to hear everyone's kind of opinions on this, that the remix music and the digital realm with its streaming sites and different algorithms and kind of corporate control does work as commodity in that way, where its cultural value is often transformed into economic kind of value. So how do we then kind of work around, because then nowadays there's been certain aspects of monetizing YouTube, and then how, if you want your song or your music to kind of circulate more, then then it has to, you have to garner a certain kind of audience. Then there's been certain restrictions, age restrictions and money restrictions that are often put in to that aspect. So that is something we can actually think about and discuss, and how that kind of comes forth in this aspect as well. And the digital and the remix, to conclude, I would like to say kind of work as memory. A remix of a song actually, it asks the audience. What was interesting is when we listen to the remix, which have also happened for different Bollywood music, different kinds of songs which have lived the kind of test of time, it kind of asks us to rely on a memory of a song, and it depends on a certain kind of love and affiliation to the original soundtrack. Vibhuti Duggar has actually written extensively on this. And I would find that kind of Jhumur music that presently circulates in the digital realm, and especially circulates among the tribal communities through different kind of TikTok sites as well, through TikTok and of course through Facebook, and kind of different youth coming together and kind of singing and even recording their
Devika,
voices.
please conclude now.
Yes, I'm concluding. So the Jhumur music that presently circulates in the digital realm also draws from that memory, be it a memory of community, belonging, or a shared history and collectivity, or the present day and age of a certain kind of precarity, where there's a lot of contractual labor that has come up in tea plantations, and the tea plantation community from Assam constitutes a very strong portion of the migrant population that goes to especially Tamil Nadu, Arunachal Pradesh, and West Bengal to work as kind of labor in these cities, as in the cities of these states as well. So even though the contemporary Jhumur music, which might not necessarily have clear overtones, which the music that comes out now, of memory of the migration and exploitation during colonial rule, but the very genre is based on memory and community, as the recognition of Jhumur music with its thematics of love, work, kind of community ties, continues to tie the genre to the tea plantation workers as well, even though there's been a certain kind of out migration from these plantations with precarity of life that is forming. So that's been my presentation. I would love to hear people's ideas and questions around it the same. Thank you.
Some questions in the chat box. I'll read it for you. Uh,
Yeah.
One is from Ruchi Nagpal. She wants to ask, how does digitization alter the reception and idea of folk songs, since the idea of folk is all about people coming together for social bonding?
Thank you, Ruchi. Thank you, Ruchi, for your question. So the how do we, that's actually a very interesting question, which recently I have been thinking about. So when we talk of digitization and the ideas of folk song coming together, especially at times where everyone is separated. So none of the festivals, even though they were celebrated, but they at least back in April, where Bihu was celebrated in Assam in a very kind of strong sense. So when that could not be celebrated, where people could come together because there was the stricter sense of lockdown during that period. So I mean, this even happens even when there wasn't a lockdown, but all the TV kind of channels and news media channels were filled with different kind of artists and songs of artists that were being played at the television and kind of different streaming sites that that was present at that kind of time. So that in kind of through the digital realm that I also mentioned, through TikTok and Facebook, that has allowed a certain kind of circulation, especially among the youth, that would kind of uh, that has come about. So through different social media sites, too, as different kind of comments that people leave over social media, different ideas, even a certain kind of array. This is such a good song. This is so nice. You're looking so good in when you're singing it, or the video of the song is really nice and fun. So that kind of has, and so the kind of folk tradition of social bonding, as you've also rightly pointed out, has the scope even in social media. It's not a, it's like, I don't see this kind of the digital realm or the social media as a different site from where there's another form of social bonding happening, but there's an overflow of the social bonding that is already present within the community that we find in the everyday, fi- finding and overspinning itself into social media and different kind of streaming sites as well. So that would be a certain kind of idea with regard to answer your question.
Okay. Thank you, Devika. The next question is from Professor Zedi. Uh,
Yes.
she, these songs and dances are part of process of community formation, and the
Yes.
materiality is what lends them in this quality. When they move to
Yeah.
digital realm, aren't they transformed into artifact to be admired and enjoyed, but not necessarily as part of world making process?
Yes. So when there's been a certain kind of when you say travel, so but the point is there's actually a very lively kind of tea plantation community, if I've understood your question correctly. But there's been a very lively kind of tea plantation community which is even ever present today, and there have been certain kind of, especially in the Bokhagar regions now of Assam and different kind of regions where if there is a strong kind of trade union movement or workers movement that is alive. So even the songs which are seen as songs of cultural activists, which would necessarily become a kind of cultural artifact that we've talked about, especially say Kali Das Gupta's work, which I've extensively looked at in my paper. And these songs would then turn into those kind of artifacts, but as the kind of community and collectivization around political issues remains strong and remains alive, there would kind of remain the sense of turning these songs and turning these aspects into a very live kind of lively aspect of the everyday life of the worker, even if it's the everyday life of resistance. Now, with the new changes in labor laws, there have been a number of strikes in Assam tea plantations where there was talks of course, changing the working hours to 12 hours, but there were obviously kind of churning of the workers coming together, and obviously that that was obviously never implemented in tea plantations, and of course that has certain implications where contractual labor will be worse affected. But the kind of, if there would be a strong collectivized kind of working class movement or working experiences of collectivized tea plantation workers asserting their political identity and the history of that political identity, where they find themselves in Assam and and the present political climate of Assam. So that kind of history, and there's a strong sense of scope for that kind of assertion of that history as well that remains alive today. And with regard to the present kind of songs that are written and the kind of remixing and retelling of song, there still remains a very strong kind of sociality of the community that is present today, which kind of keeps remixing the song, which keeps bringing in the song and bringing forth a
Okay,
kind of lively
Devika,
aspect to
let
the
me move
song
on
as well.
to, because we have a few more questions. Let me move on to next question, which is also followed by
Yes.
Professor Zedi. She wants to ask that how do you address the questions of agency of Jhumur performance and digitization process? Who are the people digitizing? What ideologies, interpretive toolkit do
Yeah.
they bring to bear upon the songs in their digitization?
Yeah. So that's actually a very interesting question, which I've been thinking about myself. But because there's so many of these kind of different sites, so at one end you're finding people with their own kind of sense of ownership and agency, remixing a particular song and uploading it from their own kind of YouTube profile. But there are obviously like a lot of young Adivasi youths from tea plantations going to kind of production houses uh, in Guwahati or Jhorat or different kind of places, and asking for a chance to kind of sing and to be recorded and to find uh, to, to be part of the entire circuit of recording a recording artist and kind of doing cover music in that sense. And they obviously then they remain under the helm of the kind of the music production house, and that kind of circulation exploitative relation also remains in place. So there has been these kind of multiple aspects of it as well. And then you would find Kalidas Gupta's work and his family and the kind of organizations and ideologies with which he's been associated with, which has been kind of different left forces and different groups which fight against exploitative and oppressive aspects. So they then kind of run his songs, and the different cultural groups that have kind of lived, like even IPTA has had a very kind of lively life in Assam, and they then have extensively performed Kalidas Gupta's songs. So there are these kind of songs are also different nature, and there are also different people with different ideologies who are picking it up. Then you would also find the same song like Cholmini Assam Jabo, which is actually extensively and blatantly talking about exploitative relations, where you'd find different folklore artists or indie artists singing it, but also different kind of big uh, music houses kind of taking a sense of ownership of the song when you with and then kind of putting it in their films and putting it in their songs, and then of course it forming a Asmi's identity with when Bhupen and Zarika would sing it or give music to different renditions to that
As
song.
we are like
So
short of time,
stays very dynamic that way.
yeah, I just want you to keep your answers a little brief as we are short of time. We have
Yeah.
one more question. I think what Prakruti was asking you is same thing which you have already answered just now. One last question by Kashish Dua. I just want to take that up. How accessible in terms of cost and reach of technology are these remix songs that are available on the digital realm? I think somewhere you have also answered this one also, but I would like to
Yeah.
brief your
Yeah.
answers a bit.
Briefly, yeah. So just to kind of reiterate what I'd said earlier, that there's and to briefly say that there are different kind of sites where people have like taken kind of self ownership of it, but they've also kind of where they've uploaded it on their own streaming sites or uh, on their social media, or kind of different music houses kind of produce it and kind of make it open for circulation. And it's also within the tea plantation community, as people are slowly moving closer to technology. Of course, not internet is exceedingly expensive now. With online education, we are finding it even more expensive and difficult to access, so that those kind of challenges always remain, but people have. And then of course, when there are different DJs who come to perform during festivals, those songs kind of do find themselves in circulation time and again. So that, I hope, briefly answers their question, and thank you so much for all the different questions. I'd love to get back to them personally in the chat box as well.
Okay,
Thank
thank you so much, Devika. It was really, really interesting to know more about the oral narrative and the digitization. Even I have some of the questions, but because of short of time, I think I can take it offline sometime, or maybe in the chat box, I can discuss that thing. I would last just give a big thank you to all the presenters, Tanya, Prakruti, Salwa, Devika, for their wonderful presentation and their varied perspective about digital humanities and the areas in which they are working. They are so diverse that it really makes me feel that we are all going so huge digitally and trying to harness a lot of good things and bring something very new and varied to this platform. So thank you all of you for your presentation, and thank you Professor Zedi for making me part of this. And now I think we can move on to the next session. Over to you, Ruchi.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to all presenters, and special thanks to you for chairing the session and for your pertinent comments. Thank you. And I think we can start with the next session. So I would hand over the mic to Zara now.
Thank you so much, everyone. This was a really fun session, and thank you, Reema, for taking care of us so well. Uh, we are actually going really good in terms of time, so we can start our next session now. And for that, I hand over the mic to our rapporteurs, Indrani and Jubi, who will introduce our chair.
Thank you, Zara. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to day 2, session 2. This is the keynote session to be chaired by Professor Nirmala Menon. Dr. Menon is professor of the School of Humanities and Social Sciences, discipline of English, IIT Indore. She leads the Digital Humanities and Publishing Research Group at the Indian Institute of Technology, Indore. She is the author of Migrant Identities of Creole Cosmopolitans, Transcultural Narratives of Contemporary Postcoloniality, and Remapping the Postcolonial Canon, Remap, Reimagine, Retranslate. She has published in numerous international journals and speaks, writes, and publishes about postcolonial studies, digital humanities, and scholarly publishing. Her primary area of research is on the comparative study of 20th century postcolonial literatures in English, Hindi, and other languages. Digital humanities, gender studies, globalization, and translation studies are additional areas of research. Her interests are multilingual but are interdisciplinary. Her research examines the ways in which literatures from different non-Western languages influence and can redefine and reframe postcolonial theoretical concepts. She is also on the advisory board of the Open Library of Humanities, advisory board member of Ubiquity Press UK, and advisory board member Open Access India, and chair CLCS Global South Forum, Modern Language Association. Professor Menon is one of the founder members and current president of Digital Humanities Alliance in Research and Teaching Innovation, 30. Welcome, ma'am, and thank you for joining us. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. I had some internet issue here, so I was trying to fix that. Good afternoon, everyone, and it is wonderful to be here. And it's been wonderful to be part of this two-day conference. Hi, Nishat. I think our speakers are here.
Hi, Nirmala, I'm here.
Hi, Souvik. And where is Maya?
Hi, Nirmala. Yeah, thanks.
Hi, Maya. Hi, Nirmala. Hi, everybody.
Hi, all of you. So, without any, sometimes I think I shouldn't sit in the office because, something or the other is always happening. So I want to, start off this session. Wait, I'm looking for my... One minute, people. Yes. So, our first speaker today is Professor Maya Dodd from Flame University. Maya sent me this really short bio, which I really don't think does her justice, but she is associate professor at Flame University and currently serves as assistant dean for teaching, learning, and engagement, and is the chair of the Department of Humanities and Languages. She's done her PhD from Stanford University. She is my colleague on the executive committee of Dharti and has been, one of the pioneering persons in the field. Her recent work, an edited collection of exploring digital humanities in India, pedagogies, practices, and institutional possibilities, I think is a must read because it's one of those, anthologies of DH projects and DH conversations, very specifically to the Indian context. And so without any further ado, I will hand over to Maya for her keynote today.
Thank you, Nirmala. Thank you. I'm so excited to be in the program, given all the fascinating conversations that have happened over the past few days. I've been watching over YouTube, I must admit, not necessarily live, but clearly, there is a sense in this program that the tools of DH are revolutionary in what can be done. And a lot of focus has been given, to that aspect of what, people have been experimenting with and what other sort of, things remain to be done. But less mention maybe has been made of the why. Because in a way, it's been assumed, right, that the discussion on that front is done and dusted. But I'd like to return attention to that aspect, right? And this is a sort of maybe 2 steps back moment, but I think it's a necessary kind of a, reflection, right, at this juncture of so much new and so much broken and so much post-COVID and whatnot, right? So the why question may have as its obvious answer one overwhelming rationale, which is the archival deficit. And in fact, so basic is this, right, that we don't even make much of it because we recognize that we don't have the same archival access to, let's say, what has happened with mainstream English literature. And I think, Dr. Zaidi, you made this point that non-Anglophone writing does not have that sort of corpus, to refer to and such. So in the first instance, it's the idea of access that underwrites the need for DH, and the ability of this access to cast a new light on cultural memory and engagement. Tied to this need, though, is the question of who will fund these new infrastructures and who is narrating these stories, right? The ecosystem in the Indian academic or in the glam spaces is not straightforward. So untangling this question clarifies not just the formalities, of funding, who and all that, but who the audience also is, in a sense. So clearly, in a nation of 1 billion plus, there is no singular audience. And more than the rhetorical gestures, I feel there's a lot of gesturing that often happens, right, about inclusivity. We actually need to span the distance between the concrete and the exemplary. In a sense, it is relevance that frames the meaning of this archival object. As much as history is an act of translation, archival returns are invariably also about our present. So, in a sense, what we are asking is what are the empirical consequences of an excavation or a reconstruction of a narrative account, right? And these accounts are as much embedded in their cultural contexts as their social, political, economic. So, now as a retrospective exercise, one can argue that the practices that we have described thus far define the scope, and revisiting where DH in India has been perhaps can chart its future course, right, into what I'm calling digital cultures for this talk. But in my talk, I'm going to roughly sort of draw out the contours that frame theoretical considerations when we speak of digital cultures. And I use this term to exceed, the idea of only literary considerations and take on the sort of larger social context in which meaning is embedded. So if it's all right, I will share my screen and hope that, yeah, things are visible to everyone. Working?
Yes.
Okay. All right, great. So just 1 second, I need to sort of close some windows, I think. Yeah, excellent. All right. So the formats of culture in India span the analog and the digital, right? While it may seem like the end goal is the totality of the digital, in India, we have always lived in multiple time zones of history. So from novels to screens, whether it was Vikram Chandra's Sacred Games, which in 2006 was a novel, made its way to Netflix in 2018, from Twitter to history, whether it's Prashant Bhushan's tweets that have very real consequences, right? And sort of make, non-fictional accounts much more alive and present, to the changed media of poetry, right? So that is to say that Rupi Kaur's Instagram poetry coexists, right, with the great canonical things that we read in classrooms. Indian digital cultures are marked by an intersection. So just as the lyrics of Majru Sultanpuri retain enduring popularity side by side with Gully Boy remixes, we have to acknowledge the twinned realities of an Indian digital culture marked by mobile phones and a frequent lack of electricity. To understand the circumstances of how digital cultures differ, we read in multilingual, multimodal, and polyvocal terms. When attending to popular culture texts, they are not only read for content, but also as milestones of how forms shape content and subsequent meaning. The recent talk, on YouTube Shairi was so fascinating exactly for this reason, that there is a sense in which the popular exists in many realms we wouldn't have sort of otherwise suspected. So I was really grateful to be able to listen into that one. I'm just going to see. Yeah. Okay. All right. So I want to sort of refer now back to a very sort of familiar argument to those who have come from post-colonial literature. And I will get to that sort of, in terms of saying that maybe we want to revisit this in the time of the digital. Just sort of one, note before that, that we have lived through a very exceptional year where the sort of societies have now realized that the constraints of an industrial age, right, and its limitations can be transcended. I am not, sort of ignorant or I don't want to bring in the digital divide question there just at this minute. But what I want to sort of focus on really is the fact that we've expanded our public sphere in a way that we never imagined was possible. And the question of why do we do things the way we do them, and this is true of our commute or, inflexibility at work, really has sort of put back the human being at the center of all these systems and devices, right? So in another sense, there is an awareness, there's a newfound awareness of questioning, right, why and how we're doing business. And that, I think, needs to also be linked now to this very enduring argument that has been made in post-colonial studies, right, which is that the novel is fundamentally an allegory for the nation. You will remember famously the debate between Ajaz Ahmed and Jameson on this point. And really, in some other sense, I think the digital has now become a form of a site of anxiety, where we don't have these total terms and concepts to sort of fix back onto, you know, these cultural formations. And so in a sense, it's a side of anxiety about incomplete becoming and a new area of sociality. If the internet is a text to be read, then the WhatsApp forwards, Twitter injunctions, Facebook families are all its characters that deserve our collective attention. As a temporal contradiction, the term digital dualism, coined by sociologist Nathan Yugerson, describes a differentiation of online and offline as distinct from each other. But this incompatibility isn't as true in the Indian case. It's certainly not the picture, right, from the coordinates of digital India, where you have to acknowledge the intersecting parts of the analog and the digital. So hence Gert Loving's point that the offline is crucial to understanding the online, I think, is where we sort of begin, in a sense, this journey on, reframing our basic questions. I'd like to actually, sorry, I'm sort of dealing with two screens. So yeah, okay. I'd like to narrate an incident from my own career, if you will spare me, this amount of vanity. I was a graduate student at Stanford University in the early 2000s, and I was able to take this class called The Wired Historian. I was entirely out of my depth. I understood that there were new technologies that were being deployed to scan, Michelangelo sculpture and, all kinds of things. Even code, people who had a computer language could use it as a second language. You had to do two foreign languages so that, met the requirement. But actually speaking, at Stanford in the early 2000s, all of this was far from institutionalized. And this is not just my memory or experience. In fact, Professor Franco Moretti, whose groundbreaking work, Atlas of the European Novel, shifted the field of literary studies in terms of what we read, right? Remembers, in fact, this incident that I will just state as a quote from something, an interview he gave recently. He says, in the 2000s, there was interest in these new digital techniques, but not great interest. First, the first graduate seminar that Matthew Jockers and I, meaning Moretti, offered in 2004 was called Electronic Data and Literary Theory. And that course had one student. But we insisted and insisted and insisted. And then one day in 2010, Moretti tells Matthew Jockers, look, let's take a piece of paper, write Stanford Literary Lab on it, put it on a door, and see if this changes things, right? So he went to the chair of the department, and there happened to be an empty room, and he said that, if it's all right, we'd like to use it, got permission. And so basically with a piece of scotch tape, he says, I printed the paper and we pasted this on the door. One thing that happened was that we found, he says, the way for graduate students to count their work at the lab for some credit, okay? Then the lab receives this money from the university for its first 2 years. I'm talking 2010, right? So please, this is hardly even a decade now. He says we received $20,000 for 2 years, but since they had to buy computers and screens and whatnot, it was basically nothing. But beside that, we didn't really need a lot of money. What we needed, and this is something he says they got, was free time, much more than the money. And the free time to read, think, talk, and study was really the precious sort of, startup that this lab sort of, achieved. Now, I cite this chronology of events to draw attention to the fact that even 10 years ago at Stanford, the darling of the Silicon Valley, the interest in computational humanities was minuscule, and it was akin to a quirk or a hobby. The distance between the humanities and computational tools was no less foreboding for the location of these studies, right? For the fact that this was in the, premier arena. In the decades since, not only has the social web exceeded the idea of what the 2006 Time Person of the Year, which was you, right, representing individual content creators, etc., foretold, but we now live in an era where India is the leading country in the world for Facebook audience size. So now, beyond the idea of the digital as a technical and hence solution to a problem, right, lies the reality of its alchemy. The transition to digital has obviously exacerbated the idea of the divide, the digital divide. But the fact is that those with and without access have been changed by this technical transformation. The point of this now is to study what it means to be online, right, in cultural terms. And there's phenomenal work that's happening on this front, and I'm really glad, that there is so much sort of community that's building also around these points. So Ashwin Punthambekar and Shira Mohan's recent book, and other sort of infrastructure studies focused books are looking right at this question of not just the divide, but sort of what happens when people go online. And I would like to sort of twin that story now to the story of what are we studying in English departments in such sort of classrooms, right? So to trace the recent story of DH from large archival projects to public facing efforts involves a sense of curation of contemporary heritage and a new approach to cultural studies in India. Where the story has been told through the tale of digital archives, the focus of this talk is about the work that remains to be done, and a real spotlight needs to be placed on the challenges of reading and understanding digital cultures in India today, and hopefully a list of challenges, issued forth will supply some inspiration. Okay. So where is DH, right? Even as there is no definitive view of what is DH and such, there is no singular view elsewhere either. Going by the names of publications in the field like debates and of DH thing, hashtag scholar forums, DH is met with much argument over its definition and of course about its utility, right? So I sort of return the question there. The survey of DH in India begins with, of course, P.P. Sneha's wonderful monograph published online, available, of course, even now at the Center for Internet and Society, where she asked the question of why is it so difficult to pin down DH in India? It's kind of like the question Nirmala was asking about electronic literature. Is it not there, or am I just not able to see it, right? And so she suggests that the difficulty in locating DH also indicated a shift in the episteme of both humanities and technology, which signals not only a move toward interdisciplinarity, but also in the whole process and praxis of knowledge making as such. In project formulation, selection of tools, and curation, now lies a chance to rethink how we navigate traditional humanities projects and to render the maker, right, as agentive in relation to the adaptation of technology to their work. Now, without presuming its sites and for the purposes of identifying DH in India, let's sort of name the usual suspects. Of course, there's the Varorium of Tagore's works in Vichitra, done by SCTR at Jadavpur, the Dutch and Scottish Symmetries Project at Presidency by Souvik, 2 centuries of Indian print with the British Library in Jadavpur, which involved Padmini, Reema, and Nirmala's, of course, initiatives with K-Ship at IIT Indore. Additionally, of course, there are several more efforts which are featured in this book that came out this year, Exploring Digital Humanities in India. But as P.P. Sneha states, and I'll quote from the book, in the Indian context, the question of digitality also becomes important from the perspective of technological obsolescence, where there is a great resistance to discontinuing or phasing out the use of certain kinds of technology, either for lack of access to better ones or simply because one finds other uses for it. This means that the digital divide is fundamentally a part of structural inequality as the murky baseline to access. Especially since the COVID-19 pandemic, questions have been raised, right, on the digital divide, much more sort of in a much more, urgent fashion. And given that they are sort of complicated and linked to variance in economic, social, technological, pedagogical access, it is a story also of, why, we're talking about online life at all, right, in another sense. Sorry, I'm just, okay. So, I'm going to just sort of go over a few comparisons and I will explain to you later why. So, there's much talk about Digital India, and in the meantime, the focus when we talk about archival work also links to the state. So there is a reason, right, that of course the state is the largest holder in some sense of common cultural heritage. And so I'm not keen to focus this discussion on that form of archival and other holdings, but really about this transition to digital in terms of both what the state delivers as well as private and other public participation. Now, posing the challenge of the digital as a function of presentist limitations, cannot be decided entirely by access to tools and resources, but by the recognition that transitions are underway already, whether we were able to detect these or not. To start off, we scarcely have to emphasize the significance of the digital for our times. We're living in an era that may be retrospectively viewed as one when Digital India shaped the country's discursive future. As the Digital India website proclaims, the program is centered on 3 key vision areas: digital infrastructure as a core utility, governance and services on demand, and digital empowerment of citizens. These goals will be achieved through the creation of digital infrastructure service. Despite the claims of Digital India, the irreversible impact of the digital turn on humanity will remain, right, for a long time to come, not only as a function of governance, right, or commerce, but really as something which is, uh, you know, sort of in which we are all implicated, right? And the reason, of course, DH right now is being viewed as something of deep interest for pedagogical reasons has much to do with the framing in that sense. Uh, I want to, sort of talk now about the institutional story. Sorry, I've jumped a slide, I think. And the sort of institutional story really was that the digitization of things, that the state achieved has, other institutions that were doing similar things in the ecosystem. Now, in the North American academic ecosystem, you often find this figure of the digital librarian or, some sort of support staff that are enabling that. And that is a very different tale, right, at our side. And so, these examples on the slide are really about individual and collective efforts to enhance access. So whether it was the Archive and Access Project or the media archives, the Indian Cine.ma and such, really it was the presentation of a connected interest that undergirds the effort. And in many ways, of course, this is the right to research at play, which is that given that the digital exists as a platform, why not, in every sense, put stuff on it and have it be queried? And this was, of course, being done also by the state in terms of films division, archives, and such that were being opened. Now, the sort of contrast with this, of course, is the sort of scale of projects like the Indian Company Digitization Project, which had three partners, the National Gallery of Modern Art in Delhi, Victoria Memorial Hall in Calcutta, and the Victoria and Albert Museum in the UK, which produced a catalogue that has over 100,000 digital objects. So obviously, the sort of achievement is significant. And, this is a recent article that comes out sort of, again, talking about the sort of game-changing nature of what this achieves. In the meantime, we also see private efforts, right? And I refer now to the Asia Art Archive effort, which is also a digitization, but also greater than that effort where a lot of ephemera and, biographical sort of repositories were scanned and put together, and all kinds of things were created to constitute a bibliography of modern and contemporary art writing. And this is an annotated bibliography, which comes as a searchable digital database. Again, over 12,000 texts in over 12 languages. And, this is great because in many ways, this is an attempt also at critical bilingualism, which I think we're going to see more and more of a need for. So clearly the sort of first, the first example of, the National Museum and such, their collaborative work has its counterpart in the private sector in terms of Asia Art Archive. But moving on to the, asking about what about other digital spaces, I want to present, in this talk, the idea of the anti-archive. Now, I know that there has been so much focus, very, very rightfully so, on what is required for better archiving and for sort of more robust archival spaces. But I think there is a default kind of a leaning then on the formal sector of what gets included, right? And the truth of the matter is most archives are accidental, incomplete, uh, far from ever going to be completed spaces, and often exist because of official sanction. And I'd like to contrast that space of official sanction with, in a sense, other digital spaces that may not have the same amount of funding and whatnot to study them. But the truth is they constitute the cultural debris of our time. And in many, many ways are equally deserving perhaps of, projects and such to sort of query, what's going on here. So in terms of this, I mentioned the sort of figures just as, indications of why the scale is significant, but why does this matter really is what I want to talk about. And the truth is that social media is just one side, right, of what digital culture and such is doing. But in every sense, what we're actually looking at, and I think this conference has brought this out in the most beautiful fashion, is the newer forms of inscription and culture. And those spaces of engagement that are relevant to people's lives and that are really changing the story for whether it's the popularity of Urdu or the perpetuity of folk and traditional, music or whatnot. So to sort of illustrate this, I would like to, describe the possibilities of how digital cultures are emerging. This is very brief, of course, right now, but really in the sense of what's yet possible. And I think despite questions of surveillance and tracking and privacy, data, all of those are very valid questions. But in every sense, digital culture trysts with what it means to be human in times of technological possibility are, in a sense, the substance of our contemporary, offering. And I want to sort of place this, in context, right, by saying that a lot of the papers in this conference and otherwise in DH focus really on the question of literary analytics, cultural analytics, and the creation of archives. And I put this, I'll sort of explain it in a minute, the question of how the very making of these objects is part of a framework of access, right, where you have others, you have funding models, you have the space for critique or whatever that affords these digital objects to be made. But to understand that as an area of study that encompasses digital fields as form, means that we posit the access desired by us as content. So I will explain this in a second. But really in terms of, uh, yeah, yeah. So obviously the uniquely Indian challenge, right, to all of the digitization of content and languages and public access affords us a sort of opportunity at this historical moment. And the cultural and linguistic diversity are positioned alongside what is historically been determined by archiving and curation, right, which, as we know, are colonial practices. And conventional categories of archiving would discreetly view, activism or public history or oral history or whatever as not quite being the same thing. But by capturing all of these under the umbrella term of digital humanities, right, one can capture the disruption of the digital alongside sort of the disruption of the social. So I want to sort of have us think through this, idea through, something that Padmini, a wonderful colleague of mine, mentions, where this quote that has become a T-shirt worthy slogan at this point, which is that my DH, your DH is not my DH. And what Padmini was drawing attention to was that there is the yeah, there is the need to sort of look at how critical making also might be a useful mode of inquiry in a context in India where DH is relatively nascent. And in order to supplement and inform an emergent narrative of history, right, we need to sort of rethink what archival or other restitutions we are performing. So so hence I want to now draw attention to what I believe are sort of exemplary efforts in this space. And I'm not sure if they were mentioned earlier, and hence I feel the need to perhaps just name check them at the very least. And so toward contouring what this field could look like, these are some of the sort of efforts that are existent, and of course many of you know them. But really, just as sort of an archive of queer history serves as a record of the dehumanization of the community as much as it's about narratives of becoming, right? It's a memoir of trauma, but it's also a site of archival justice. Digital tools create many ways of seeing, knowing, and communicating, and in this process they contribute to new models of distributing resources, ideas, and information, and new interfaces for interacting among diverse human communities. Now, I want to contrast two sites. I'm going to, of course, the National Museum has, I mean, the number of art objects are just mind-boggling, in terms of what Google Arts and Culture has captured, but also in terms of the holdings of that museum. And I want to contrast this with this site, and I just mentioned the URL on this. This is something where the anti-archive, right, and this is where I got the idea from really to talk about, is the debris that came from border crossing across the US-Mexico border, and it comes into this into play with this project, and you can read more about it here. But really, this is not curated in the way of thinking that we're going to go out there and then we're going to sort of look for significant objects that tell these histories. So, for instance, it's a very sort of very poignant actually mention of the hanging of bras from trees. And apparently this is a sign of a rape having been sort of occurred at that point. And it's more than from the site I learned this, that there's more than sort of 80% incidents of women recounting, being raped when they attempt to cross the border. And of course, this was, a history of such profound trauma that how do you even begin to tell it? So this sort of collection of, you could say, roadkill, right, in terms of the debris that exists, constitutes this project. And in the way that, this is not curated with that sort of eye of, telling history in the way that we think of sort of, the official record, I think this offers us a way to query how do we want to tell our stories, right, in the future. I don't want to depress you too much, but I think that there are people doing fantastic work in this country who may not think of themselves as digital humanists or as part of digital humanities at all. And I'm calling this digital on field partly because, in a sense, it is our job to perhaps connect up with them and see how other stories can be told. And those are not just about constituting digital archives, really, but across, right? And I'm looking at, for instance, the Keystone Foundation's efforts through a community newspaper, community radio. It's very similar to what the podcast perhaps does, right, in our classrooms and things. But really, the sort of need to bring these into play and into conversation is to evidence the fact that the impact of the digital is accelerating in all spheres in India, from the classroom to the museum. And public humanities work has a lot to gain from its digital encounters. So what Google has been talking about is India's next billion users, right? If 90% of Indians don't understand the dominant language of the internet today, there is no doubt that the changing nature of the digital will be accompanied by a change in its language, its forms, its stories, right? And the voices that get heard. Now, given that regional language users will account for 75% of the country's internet user base, as per the next billion, the interest of global business in catering to India is now focused on creating experiences and products, whatever, for that punch, right? But the stories that we tell, right, in terms of our need to query the digital will also be a necessary part of this education. And so just as a sound humanities education urges an examination of the human condition, a relevant education will entail an examination of the digital life and reflections on subjectivity, digitality, alterity, all accompany questions of history, archive, memory, and the imagination. So by extending questions of the digital beyond digital India, digital cultures need to be queried just as we do literary texts. To attend to life online and the cultures around the social web is the work that lies ahead to produce more responsive and scholarship for an expanded public sphere. Finally, for models of sensitive participatory pedagogy, so needed in the context of historically marginalized communities in India, the act of digital curation often coincides with the act of preservation itself. Oral historian Surajit Sarkar asks if one can recover the oral, the direct, and the analog in the digital age. Who can be known across digital spaces? How do we ask them to present their worldview or want or desire or to discomfort us? And in what ways can these be represented? So on the lines of Keystone Foundation and Rita Banerjee's Green Hub Fellowship and Surajit Sarkar and other people's work at Ambedkar University Center for Community Knowledge, we can perhaps think of the Anti-Archive as the start point for a study of digital cultures, which in my understanding then would be a form of returning knowledge back to the community through a combination of different digital objects being created and allow that creation to itself become part of the self-definition of that community. So this is where I end. Thank you for your attention. And yeah, sorry, it was quite the monologue.
Thank you so much, Maya. That was absolutely fascinating. And I think, the way you kind of put together the archive and the anti-archive, I think that's just kind of registered in my head. I'm always going to think about the archive and anti-archive together now. Thank you so much. There are many questions here, and I'll get to those questions. I did not realize that, and Dr. Reema Chowdhary is here now, that our DH lab in IIT Indore kind of started like, I did not know it was like Frank Moretti and Matthew Jokers, where we just put a printed name that said Digital Humanities Lab IIT Indore, right, Reema? and that's how we grew, kind of looking at things and looking at projects. So I will put my questions to the last, and I'll go to the questions that I hear. So Juby is asking, ma'am, would private sector archives be open access? Which I think, is a great question. And I think I will tail that on to Souvik's question also. Yeah. That what do you have to say about private archives even in the conventional sense, that do not have any funding. And he's referring to the open access plaques of presidency project designed by undergraduates with almost no funding, and
Yes.
using middleware tools. So kind of the minimal computing model, I think. How
Yes.
can we enhance these efforts, if at all, in the Indian scenario, and how is the disruption of the digital going to figure among the three pillars of digital India?
Souvik, such tough questions, yeah. I'm just about getting started in my head thinking. So I think, whenever you sort of finish one marathon, you start preparing, mentally for the next, right? And I think that, with Dharti having, I think, a 2-year anniversary, at least, almost,
Yes.
having gone by, there is a sense of, wow, so much achieved and now so much to be done, right? And Souvik, I think we feel this special pain of minimal computing, right? It sounds so lovely. It sounds so sort of like, most relaxation, minimal stress. But really, it's about having no budget, no resources, no means. And this is not unique to us. I think this is the story of most of the efforts that, anti-archival type projects will face. So now this is, I think, Nirmala, I'm going to bounce the ball to you in terms of asking the questions about funding, which I think, DH in the West has such a comfortable ecosystem, right, from which that derives, that we are not we feel a little bit like poor and awkward, to sort of compare ourselves in that regard. But if you haven't checked out Souvik's Plaques of Presidency project, right, it is an exemplary instance of what is possible. And that's the point, right? It is the energy and it's the intention. And given that often things, yes, are zero budget, the open access part is a rider that comes with it. Right? The moment you have not received massive amounts of funding from whatever place, that automatically belongs back to the public because it's an act of love. It's almost pro bono work, right?
Yeah.
But to sort of tie that to the question, I'm sorry, I had no eyes on the chat till now. I've been to the Tata archives in Pune. I know corporate houses have archival spaces, Godrej archives, of course, these. So you sort of request it it's a little bit of a favor in the way that it's very plush, it's very nicely air conditioned, it's very well maintained. But when you go to access a record from those archival spaces, often the question is, what are you looking for? So this sort of, having to justify or spell out your good intentions, right, is actually not even, it's equal to the same way you do it in government spaces. You're viewed with suspicion across all archives. Right, that's not unique to private or state, but there's sort of need to, I think, recognize that you are privileged to be given that access is the opposite moment of what, in a sense, we would desire, which is that historical memory and such belongs to the public. Right? What do you mean that this is a favor to me to gain access to the archive? And so for that reason, we believe that digital archives, right, will solve this problem. And, the moment everything gets digitized, we're all good. But the fact is, it's the what gets left out, which is usually the most critical page. And I mean, I know this from my sort of work with, the Shah Commission report with the emergency and whatnot, that it's that document that you didn't even know was missing. So, it's wonderful the 99 other pages were digitized. But I think that we need to recognize the inherent incompleteness of the archive. And so stop waiting for this, sort of messianic moment where everything will be delivered to us. And to work with the fragments that we have. And this is, sorry, if it didn't come through, this was the crux of my point, to tell stories, right? Because in every sense, the idea is that you are narrating something that may not have had its chance had it not been for this pretext. And that object or that trigger or that instance is the pretext. And the text, right, really is not as complete a document as you'd ever want. So, it's partial, it's a subjective view, but given that, I think so much emphasis is suddenly going to the official archival spaces that I want to come out of that and say, hey, there's enough going on outside also. So can we take a look at it? Sorry, I'll just read these questions quickly.
And I agree with you, Maya. And I also think that, when we talk about private archives, I think that is where I think our ecosystem is slightly different.
Yes.
So, and I think as you and Souvik and all of us are aware that, for research in India, whether it is in, your fundamental sciences and humanities and social sciences, I'm leaving the applied sciences out a little bit because, some of the applied sciences get some kind of funding from private agencies. But for the fundamental sciences and the humanities, 99.5% of our funding comes from the government of India, right? So there is really no way that even if we were to put in the kind of effort, like the Godrej Media Lab is now closing down, right? So in other words, when you face a crunch, that's the first thing they close down.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to kind of, depend on government resources as of now. Right. And I think in terms of open access is such an important question for us in terms of, access for our students who are not at elite universities or institutes or, are in small places in rural areas in India. And I think like the National Digital Library or the Shodh Ganga, InflibNet, these are all big archives, incomplete, as you say, they're always incomplete in some ways, but expanding. And as long as we put in the efforts to make those inclusive, that is our best shot at inclusivity in access to research scholarship, right? Because for most of our students, the big databases are still are still not there, right? Or then you have to step into what you call the anti-archive, right? And the dark web. And yes, our students are very industrious and they do manage to get their hands on it, and, hats off to them, So it's like, the difference between, it's a digital version of the college street that Souvik knows about, right? How do we create that? And,
No, I don't know how Souvik did Plaza Presidency, honestly, because for institutions that big, you'd imagine that there are official memory spaces to tap into, right? But my sense is that you must have had to begin from scratch in terms of assembling those tales. Sorry, I think you're on mute, Souvik. Yeah.
So I didn't do it at all. My students did it entirely. And it was just fascinating how they managed to do it on pocket money. And maybe $500 borrowed from me or something, or a camera borrowed or something. So yeah,
right.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah. And I also think, Souvik, I mean, when you just said that, what occurred to me is that is how my students did most of their work, and it also occurs to me that, I mean, we have always kind of assumed minimal computing without actually,
without having to state it.
I think that was kind of my question, Maya. Nirmala has kind of articulated it better, that I was, we are assuming this minimal computing as a default in India.
Yeah. And hence the vitality also of the offline, right? That our online is asynchronous. It's not always in real time, whether you can charge your phone because there's electricity or not. So, I mean, in every sense, if we keep those considerations, foremost, then our understanding of even archiving is sort of personal stories, right? The sort of memories that I'm sure retired professors from presidency might have would far perhaps exceed what the official library or whatever might contain. And this is precisely why we kind of be a little more pragmatic about where we begin, right? For DH as well as for our sort of grander sort of need to archive. It's great. I think we need it, of course, institutionally, but it's those other stories that abound. And I'm really hoping we get a chance to listen to. So
I'll just quickly go through a couple of other questions before we go on to Souvik.
Yes.
Sango wants to know that, one of the things that has been troubling me greatly is we keep talking about digitizing archives and preservation of artifacts, literary or otherwise, and the emphasis on accessibility has been largely neglected. Don't you think it's necessary that digitization and accessibility need to go hand in hand? I hope, I think Maya, what she just said kind of answers part of that question, Sango. So I'll go to the next question and you can take both, Maya, together.
Yeah.
Rohan wants to know, how do you think activist efforts such as documenting the now might inspire student projects in India? Documenting the now is a response to Black Lives Matter movement in the US and largely documents Twitter conversation for future historians. Do you think it has a potential to inspire? And Nishat wants to know, and I'll just stop there, with the issue of erasure of marginalized communities as far as Indian digital scenario is concerned, even the apparent mainstream are quite marginal. So many mainstream poets and writers of Hindi and Urdu, and their works are nearly absent from the digital arena. So, your comments on that. So just take it out. Take it away, Maya.
Yeah. No, I think, it's funny because we're so focused on trying to preserve the analog for the digital that there is also slippage of the digital within, right now. And so this idea, like if you see the Wayback Machine, right, they have web crawls where they're actually sort of constantly sort of snapshotting what exists because there's no guarantee it will exist in the future. I think Amardeep Singh was also saying this about Scalar, that he he got his university to put it on the servers because it may not be there tomorrow. So in every sense, the digital as ephemeral should make us equally worried about how we capture that. And you're right. Sorry, I forget. I think it's Rohan saying, right, that, how do we document Twitter, for instance, for future historians? Absolutely. And that's exactly why digital culture is even more ephemeral than analog culture. So in every sense requires, our urgent attention, both in sort of reconstruction sort of ways where if it didn't exist in the analog, at least it exists in the digital. And Nishat, I hope, I really, really hope that many of your students will be just great at, sort of putting that stuff together, because as you know, even funding agencies request sometimes now a copy of all your data, right? And so anyone doing a PhD is anyway amass so much data that's such a great start point, and if you'd like a lead, Access and Archive does request and solicit data sets from people who collected things over that PhD. But in terms of the mainstream and the marginal, I think the change will actually happen when the language, sort of the dominant language game changes, right? So hopefully, for better or for worse, that next billion will unleash, a whole new historical moment. And they already, I just love these papers that were coming up through this conference. It was like, this is exactly what needs to happen, right? Let's talk about what's happening on YouTube. Why did TikTok end? Honestly, this was, you know what I'm saying? It was a whole new subcultural moment for a whole new audience. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, let's not deny that audience had never been represented. If you look at the top 5, for instance, most popular people on TikTok, it's kind of amazing, right? It's totally not what you expect. So I think that analysis is required for a more sort of democratic view of what needs to go into the archive. I think TikTok already belongs in the digital archives. Yeah. But yeah. So on that note, Nirmala, I won't eat into Souvik's time. So
yeah. Thank you so much, Maya. And I just want to show the book that is always there on my table,
which features Souvik and Nirmala, so a little bit.
Yes. Both Souvik and me are in it, but this was such a great kind of effort at putting together the minimal DH that we do in India, right? So we'll go on to our next speaker, Professor Souvik Mukherjee, and I'm delighted to present my friend and colleague Souvik. Souvik Mukherjee is an assistant professor in cultural studies at the Center for Social Studies and Social Sciences, Calcutta. Souvik's research looks at the narrative and literary through the emerging discourse of video games as storytelling media and how these games inform and challenge our conceptions of narratives, identity, and culture. Related interests and expertise include a broad spectrum of topics in game studies, ranging from identity and temporality in video games to the video game industry in Southeast Asia. Currently, he's researching how video games relate to post-colonial studies, and separately, though I thought you have already done that in one of your books, but also how certain ancient Indian board games contribute to the understanding of gameplay. Souvik is the author of 2 monographs, Video Games and Storytelling, Reading Games and Playing Books. And this is my favorite, Video Games and Post-Colonialism, Empire Plays Back in 2017. He's a co-editor of the special issue, Post-Colonial Perspectives in Video Games, and he has been named a DIGRA Distinguished Scholar in 2019. I think I knew what was DIGRA, Digital Games Research Association, which I actually come to know only through Souvik's work, to be very honest. Yeah, I follow DIGRA and what they do because, I often expect to find Souvik there. So his other interests are digital humanities, post-structuralist theory, post-humanism, and early modern literature. And most of us know his databases on the Dutch cemetery at Chinsura, the Scottish cemetery in Kolkata, and the 19th century Bengali industrialist Matilal Saul are all available, and they're all open access for all the students out here. He's also an affiliated senior research fellow at the Center for Excellence Game Studies at the University of Tampere. So without further ado, over to you, Souvik.
Well, thank you so much, Nirmala, for this very generous introduction. And I thank everyone who's kind of made time to come here, but especially Professor Nishad Zaidi for inviting me here, and the fantastic team at Jamia. and not just for inviting me here, but for letting me meet two of my friends whom I have been meeting after a long time. It is such a pleasure to see Nirmala and Maya together and kind of have a conversation. It was like almost we're back in one of those conferences when we had these conversations back in Pune, I think. Yeah. So yeah, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I will start my presentation. I mean, can I share my screen? Do I have the, just bear with me a second,
yes,
please.
you can.
Yeah.
Okay. So just bear with me a second. Sorry. Okay, here we go. So share. Right. Can you see my screen at all? It says speaking.
Yes, we can. Yes,
Yeah,
sir, we can.
fantastic.
Yes, sir.
So, my journey in video games are always for me things that keep changing. The narrative, the stories keep changing from the archive to the anti-archive, and many, many things really. So my own journey with video games is like the Piranesi Towers here, which keep kind of changing. And today I'm going to actually, my research has also changed a bit. And today what I'm going to say is something different from what I've been saying earlier. I just kind of, Professor Zaidi said that could you kind of talk about poetics and DH and in India. So I was like, well, I started thinking and I was like, I've changed my entire thinking about. So this is entirely this particular conference which has sparked this presentation. So I'll call it Speaking to the Missing Player: Subaltern Poetics in Indian Video Games. Right, here we go. So you're familiar with video games, I'm sure. When we grew up, this was actually released when I was born. But yeah, when we grew up, we were used to seeing video games like this, Space Invaders, or like you shoot, aliens come down and you shoot them. It's always about aliens, zombies, and shooting. Nice, very nice. So what is the poetics of a story like this? Does it tell a story? I can tell you lots of stories. It tells you lots of stories about the Americans building bunkers and then kind of trying to prevent kind of aliens invading, so on. But nowadays, of course, it's a little more kind of intense and serious than that. And I'm going to share my sound and also show you this clip from I was about to say film. It's almost
Listen
filmic.
to me.
A video game called Red Dead Redemption.
To kill any of you.
Can you hear the sound, Nirmala?
Me, we will. Wake them up a little. This whole thing is pretty much done. We're more ghosts than people. You have got to keep faith. They will not crush us.
Good old Dutch. My best friend. You know how we met?
So you see why I almost said film instead of video games. So and to those who say that video games don't tell stories well, I don't even have to respond to that really. But you can always come and argue with me. But then there are video games which are, I think, and I have been thinking this for a long time, that video games tell stories in rich ways. They can tell stories in rich ways. Not necessarily Tetris. A game like Tetris, I don't think it tells stories unless you are very imaginative. But like a game like Red Dead Redemption overtly tells stories. Now, of course, whenever we have this idea of storytelling, then somebody mentioned ludology, narratology yesterday. When we have this idea of storytelling, there is this question of poetics. And whenever
listen to me,
excuse me, whenever we come to the issue of poetics is always connected to one thing. The poetics, as my Western scholar friends from the global North look at. Brenda Laurel, for example, describes the video game as theater. She says that theater is not simply a metaphor, but it's a way to conceptualize the human-computer interaction. And she brings in Aristotle. And if you bring in Aristotle, you know that Aristotle focuses on action. Action is so important. So the idea of enabling humans to take action in representational words. And then move on to Janet Murray in 1998. She talks about the most important thing being agency. And what is agency? Agency is the satisfying power to take meaningful action and see the results of our decisions and choices. So the satisfying power to take meaningful action. Action has to have meaning. And then, of course, Marie-Laure Ryan talks about how the depth of immersion and freedom of choice is so important. And the model, the ideal, is the holodeck in the Star Trek, where you can actually be a character and you can actually take meaningful action. This whole meaningful action thing comes in. And then, of course, Alex Galloway just says it so clearly. If photos are images, films are moving images, video games are actions, period. So my question, okay, just before that, just to kind of, look at how games are constructed, mainly in the West, most of the games that you play are based on the hero's journey, right? Just like Harry Potter and Star Wars are also based on the hero's journey, you can just replace the names and the terms, and you'll have the same story, right? Instead of Harry Potter, just put Luke Skywalker, and then instead of Privet Drive, put Tatooine, and instead of aliens, put Muggles. It's the same thing. So Joseph Campbell's hero's journey, extremely popular and very, very kind of very common in kind of Hollywood and other ways of looking, Western ways of looking at narrative. So my point is that what about kind of let me show you another image. This is from a video game called Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. So I don't know if you can see my mouse pointer, but this muscular guy is kind of Adewale, who's a freed slave. And you are the protagonist as this guy, and you can free all these slaves. So you have the power, you have the agency. You're doing good. But my point is, what about the stories of the people who are the slaves who are tied here, who are not the freed slaves? What about them? How do we talk about them? Do we not talk about them? Do they not have stories, or do we not represent their stories in video games? And so then my question is, then, is there a poetics without agency? For those who are oppressed, those who don't have agency, is there a poetics? And I've been thinking about this, and we mentioned Gonzalo Frasca quite a lot because he coined the term ludology, but we never look at his master's thesis. This is a master's thesis, fantastic master's thesis, called Video Games of the Oppressed. And Frasca is one of the first people to say that, in SimCity, this video game, which is simulating an entire city, the racial factor is excluded from the simulated model. So if there are riots in SimCity, they're not because of Black Lives Matter. They're because of heat and unemployment. So this is written in the Rodney King, time, so no Rodney King factor. And then Frasca says that Sims deal directly with humans, and so there are ideological assumptions which are more evident. So what he wants to do is he wants to make the Sims of the oppressed, a modified version that would allow players to modify, add, and discuss the simulation model's core rules, particularly the ones that affect character behavior. And then he connects it to Forum Theater by Augusto Boal. In Forum Theater, what happens is there's not just one actor. The spectator can also be an actor, the spectator. So the spectator can walk in and also take part in the play. And the actor can take part in a normal life situation, and it can become play. So he's saying that he wants to use the theater of the oppressed techniques about Augusto Boal. And this whole theater of the oppressed is about enacting possible solutions to personal and social problems. So there may be multiple problems, multiple spectators. They bring their own problems to this particular situation. You have one situation and they bring their own viewpoints. And the whole dramatic process is borderline chaotic as well. And then you say stop, and you stop the drama. That's what happens. So Boal's kind of notion of video game design goes against Aristotle's rules for representation. And Frasca wants to bring this when he talks about video games of the oppressed. And he also says that in a game, for example, if you have a rule set, you can also change the rule set, right? So you come in, for example, take a game like Space Invaders, which I just showed you. And then Frasca talks about a game that is designed called Insults. So here, these are stick figures. These are gay. These are like three gay guys who are being called fag by their kind of classmates, and they're fighting back by singing. And this is the music. So it uses the same kind of same rule base of Space Invaders to kind of talk about queerness and how queerness responds to kind of insults. And then the one on the right is Elizabeth Lopenzi's Invaders. Instead of space invaders, it's invaders. And here are these hordes of aliens coming in, and they're being shot at by Native Americans, because it is about the aliens who are invading the Native American space, the the white American people who are invading the Native American space and removing them from their territory. So you can see the same logic, the same kind of rule base being used to tell multiple different stories. So again, when we're speaking of the games of the oppressed and the games of those who don't have agency as such, I want to show you a couple more videos. And one, this is from Missing. It is a game made in India. Let me just show you the clip and then. So in the city where I live, Kolkata, there is a red light area, which is the largest red light district in Asia, Sonagachi. There are, you can read the number, well, 18 million people living in modern slavery in India, and there are around 40 new girls come to the area every month. And you can see, again, kind of about 17,000 kind of sex workers work and live in Sonagachi. And there's all this girl trafficking, and Missing is the story about the trafficking of these girls. And of course, Sonagachi is the creation of the British colonial system, because the British kind of passed the Contagious Diseases Act in 1860s, and then they threw what is called a ring fence around Calcutta. So kind of like a virtual ring fence, and then the red light areas would spawn around those areas. So again, so how do we represent the voices of some people who have been trafficked, really? And let's also look at what the developer has to say.
Not so limited. I would have started the game itself from the village life, where the player has to make choices, and as the game progresses, we can understand how and why the girls get trafficked by playing the game. And that's a major portion of the message and the awareness that we couldn't do in this game, that we missed, and I would like to kind of do that. There is another part we never got in depth with the characters. The several characters are playing in this world. Like, everybody has their own stories, and they have their inhuman sides, and we never got kind of in depth into those characters and their stories as well. What is the exact problem with them? We can have a deeper understanding of this world.
I long to go home, to where I belong.
So the developer is actually admitting to the fact that it is some of it, again, there are missing messages in this game called Missing. When he's trying to kind of access the stories of the girls who are trafficked, when he's trying to represent them, he's trying to speak about them, let's not say speak for them, then even then there are some messages which are missing, which he is struggling with. And there are so many multiple kind of voices that do not get kind of reflected. If you look at the feedback on this game, there's so many people who are playing it on the Android Play Store. They put their feedback, and you see that these messages, kind of these missing messages, come out in some of them are actually trafficked women, and they tell you their stories as well there, which is fascinating at the same time very traumatic to hear, really. So again, how do we kind of represent these messages? And then again, I have another example from a very different developer, from very different context, which I will show here, which is a game called Somewhere, made by Dhruv Jani and Studio Oleomingus. A short video to. I'll show you the video, and then I'll explain what the game is about and what it is doing. So this game, Dhruv Jani's game, is actually called Somewhere, and is kind of what he says is that somewhere like the city of Kayamgarh, which is the city where the game is based, does not exist. You are right, it is always meant to be seen through the occluded lens of our other work. In that, it is a little like R.K. Narayan's town of Malgudi or E.M. Forster's Marabar Caves, a trope of post-colonial fiction stretched to the extreme. Now, what does he really mean by this? I mean, so the game there's a commentator who's actually saying that I don't even know if there is a game. It is a game that actually questions the very fact whether it is a game or whether it even exists. The very existence of this game is not there. And it's like the Marabar Caves. You remember E.M. Forster's Marabar Caves, where there's this sound boom, 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 and one doesn't know what happens really. So in this game, the people in the story, they reduce into single entities because they collide with each other on a map, or they split apart in a mitotic act, generating replicas filled with errors in the recollections of the narratives. So let's say one person meets another person and then merges into that person and becomes a different kind of entity altogether. So Jani says that in Somewhere, will mainly follow the travels of Aziz and Azam, a duo of thieves who trade in forgeries. The pages they have duplicated come from the journals of Charles Henry Conington, the explorer. He's a colonial explorer, but he's also an archivist. He's also trying to bring into the archive, into the fold of the archive, what could not be in an archive, which I'll come to in a second. As the player joins them in tracking down the rest of the pages, they will transform into various other characters, take on different identities, some of whom only exist in the imagination or stories of other people. So the people of Kayamgarh, they do not speak. They cannot speak. Can the subaltern speak? The people of Kayamgarh do not speak. Why? Because they are afraid that their words might penetrate the layers under which their bodies are hidden. Afraid that some phrase or name might, through woolen caps and cotton plugs and bald bits of torn rags, enter their buried ears and insert themselves into their thoughts, prompting them to think of Kayamgarh not as they see it, but as it is being described to them by the person speaking these words. So Kayamgarh then will become something else by the words of somebody else, maybe the archivist, maybe the colonial archivist. It is a fear so deeply entrenched that people now see the city with unwilling eyes, shaded behind their hands lest they be tempted into a sudden burst of verbiage by looking upon the wonders of Kayamgarh, a temptation that might resist the doctrine of their self-imposed silence. For Kayamgarh is a wonderful city where craftsmen strive hard to put into form all that they cannot give words to, where the work of craftsmen is left undisturbed, for it is only looked upon but never described by the people who never speak. So looked upon, but never described, and never archived, perhaps. So I'm kind of looking at this as kind of, when I look at this, I want to also look at a few kind of notions of poetics here. And again, just like Dhruv Jani's kind of games have some really interesting names. Let me just see if I can show you these names. No, I can't. These are names like a museum of dubious splendors. So I also named this slide a poetics of centerless agency. So, and I wrote to Dhruv and asked him what he thought of poetics. What was the poetics in his thinking of games, really? And he says that I do not think that even the simplest dislocation of text in interactive fiction requires a slightly altered. I do like to think it requires a slightly altered form of reading and criticism that takes into account not just a reader's agency, but also a reader's labor in assembling. So instead of focusing on reader's agency, I would like to look at the poetics of such games as the reader's labor in assembling an assemblage, really, but that allows it to make it build other kinds of fictions better suited to chaotic ideas and incomplete records. So chaotic ideas and incomplete records. And I myself, in my earlier work, I talk about agency as the illusion of agency, as the making ludic of agency, as the making game-like of agency, as the making illusory of agency. And I'm saying, I say that the illusion of agency most certainly includes and allows for choice. Here, choice is, however, a decentered phenomenon, and it's like a supplement. So it's not, we don't know if it's the human's choice or the machine's choice. So in 2014, when I'm writing this, I already have my doubts about agency for sure, but I still kind of want to stick to the Western notions and still impress on choice. But now I have my doubts, seriously. Because my question is, what about representing those who have little choice and even lesser agency? Should their stories not be told? Can video games, which have remained centered on the global north, address such stories as often relevant to the post-colonial scenario? The notion of a poetics of agency, I will say, is a notion of a poetics of entitlement. The fact that one believes that one can make meaningful choices and then exercise agency often does not really hold true in scenarios which are not which do not have that level of entitlement. And which is why, again, this is an anti-hero's journey, maybe an anti-archive kind of notion of kind of video game poetics. I'm going to now indulge myself again, and this is a story that I love. It's a story called Pterodactyl, Puran Sahai and Pirtha. It's by Mahashweta Devi, translated fantastically by Gayatri Spivak. And actually, before I kind of tell you, before I read this, I'll move on to the other slide. And do excuse me because I can't see my slides because of this Zoom thing. So I move on to the other slide and read a little bit of it, and then move back. So just for those of you who don't know, there is a pterodactyl which has landed in Nagasia, the region in Madhya Pradesh. And then there's this rumor about this pterodactyl, but the pterodactyl has died and it is buried by one of the tribal members of that society. For the modern Indian, the pterodactyl is an empirical impossibility. For the modern tribal Indian, the pterodactyl is the soul of his ancestors. Fiction does not judge between the registers of truth and exactitude, simply stages them in separate spaces. This is not science fiction. This pterodactyl is not science fiction. And the pterodactyl is not a symbol. The pterodactyl dies, and Bhikia, the boy struck dumb, buries him in the underground caverns of the stream walls resplendent with undiscovered cave paintings. This is Spivak's translation. Now, Bhikia, the tribal lad, is burying him in the walls with cave paintings. The cave paintings are undiscovered, quote unquote. The discovery will have to happen with the colonial or the bureaucratic post-independence kind of mindset, really. That is what is considered discovery. Otherwise, it's not discovered. So I want to go back to this quote by somebody, Alison Shelton, writing on this. The young illiterate Bhikia is also a silent storyteller who creates his own narrative voice by chiseling the image of the pterodactyl on a stone, setting in motion a series of interpretive dilemmas. Upon making this inscription, he falls mute, becoming the pterodactyl's silent guardian. The text reveals that Puran knows Bhikia can hear him. He only has stopped speaking after he drew the picture. A paradoxical, wordless interpreter, Bhikia's muteness and illiteracy suggests that he is protecting what cannot be verbalized or written down. So the whole idea about somewhere, what cannot be verbalized and written down, or the stories of trafficking, of the trafficked girls, what cannot be verbalized or written down. But there are choices. Of course, they make choices. But whether these choices are meaningful choices, thank you, Janet Murray, whether they're choices of kind of meaningful choices like Brenda Laurel says, or Aristotle talks about, is something that is a moot question. And I'm going to bring in Boal again. I didn't want to theorize too much here, but Boal we've already referred to earlier. Aristotle constructs the first extremely powerful poetic political system for the intimidation of the spectator, for the elimination of the bad or illegal tendencies of the audience. Yes, catharsis, expunge them. This system is today fully utilized not only in conventional theater, but in TV soap operas and in Western films as well, united through the common basis in Aristotelian poetics for repression of the people. But obviously, Aristotelian theater is not the only form of theater. That is the note on which Boal ends. It is not the only form of theater. And I also wish to make you think, or ask you to think, if the poetics that we have been given so far in game studies is not the only form of poetics. So, Rupika Risam yesterday commented, I listened to this later on YouTube, that how digital humanities in South Asia is changing the notion of the age globally. Shall we begin to say this about game studies in India and South Asia as well? And well, thank you very much. And if you have questions, then well. Yes.
Thank you, Souvik, for a wonderful presentation. And you just reminded me of the pterodactyl. It used to be one of my favorite stories. And I think, that what you point out is what Dipesh Chakrabarty talks about in deprovincializing Europe, right? Where, we assume that there is only something that we have to teach the pterodactyl and Bikia, and not that, we may be taught by them, right?
Yes.
And that, always, a challenge already, right?
Dipesh Chakraborty was on my mind as well constantly. I didn't cite him, but yes.
Yes, so it is, and I think even in that collection of imaginary maps, that is the most powerful story, of the pterodactyl. So I know I will save my questions for the end. I'll take the questions here. What is your opinion on the Gamergate controversy that happened in 2015 and the band of angry anonymous gamers who resorted to violent bullying against women gamers who wanted to make the field a bit more inclusive, especially since we are talking about agency?
What is my opinion then on patriarchy as such, which kind of tries to deny agency? Patriarchy and then white Anglo-Saxon Protestant patriarchy, which tries to deny agency to kind of communities that do not look like them, that do not kind of speak like them, talk like, sing like them, or, that is. My reaction is the reaction of mute anger, where I cannot where I speak but I'm not heard. Is the subaltern heard, really? My reaction is also, it also goes with Anita Sarkeesian, kind of when she is threatened with gun crime, really, when she speaks out against it. So yes, of course, I mean, there is a majoritarian trend in game studies. Sorry, not game studies. Game studies has been kind of protesting against it for sure, but in game development, especially in the global north, which is about kind of these. The angry anonymous gamers do not remain anonymous anymore, because then they become the majoritarian kind of element, and then they resort to violent bullying, and who becomes anonymous is a person like you who is going to say something about it, right? This is what happens, and that also I think restricts the potential of video games to a very narrow kind of hero's journey kind of. So yeah, that's my response, I think.
Souvik, to add on to that, I wanted to ask you, because we keep talking about digital humanities or, game studies, how important is it then to have, say, for example, from her example, women gamers be part of the conceptualization of the game, of building the game and, tweaking the game. So not having them at the beginning of the process then inevitably leads us to this kind of, majoritarian, hegemonic, however, the ones that we're so familiar with, right? And it keeps getting perpetuated because, we're not thinking about it at the conceptual level, isn't it?
Yes. And the way games are designed, they're designed from a very patriarchal, a very masculine kind of paradigm, without kind of listening to. Let me ask the game developers how many women they involve in their pilot testing, in their game testing, or in their kind of when they conceptualize the game. Fraska has taken the example of Sims, because Sims was considered a girly game. If you remember Sims, any of you, it was like, but in Sims, Fraska does fantastic stuff. He includes a model of an alcoholic mother in the family, which sets a totally different, and then you can tweak the model, you can change it according to your experiences, just like Forum Theater. He wants to make the game like the theater, and that's perhaps kind of thinking in other trajectories, thinking in other different trajectories, and not the strict. I mean, how many of us still think that Aristotle is the be-all and end-all of poetics? We teach Aristotle, of course, but then there are so many other. So game studies and digital humanities and digital kind of culture needs to be in cognizance with this fact, right? Just as my DH is not your DH, I would say that my game studies is not your game studies. Has never been, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah. And I think there is a need for those kind of diverse gamifications also, right? Because I am not a gamer. I don't play games. But when I did, a little while ago, when I was kind of interested in trying to tinker around, it seemed to me that so many of the things that I saw was so reflective of the usual, more points if you kill more people, more points if you kind of, win a war. So, the whole kind of incentivizing system is also very patriarchal and masculinist, right?
Absolutely.
And so, like, how do you, I remember, I can't even remember the name of the game, but there was some game where I was trying to see if there was a way to increase your pointing system without actually killing people.
There are many such. I mean, think of a game like Somewhere. There is no killing anyone really. There is the most violent part of it is is the recent game where you are a person who eats municipal buildings, but you have to eat municipal buildings or other buildings because you have to destroy the heritage because the government doesn't want the city to remain. So then the question arises that when you go to a graveyard, you don't want to eat it because you don't want to kind of, that is your memories kind of invested there. But the government doesn't realize it, and all of this trauma comes in really. So if I were to make a game about shooting, I would make a game which would make people think like 3 times before they want to shoot anything really. So that's the thing. I mean, perhaps that's something, and it is being made. There are lots of games like this now. I mean, but I'm just talking about the general kind of canon, as it were.
Yeah, that strangely reminds me of Murakami and the vanishing elephant.
Yes. Again, another of the subaltern and not her.
Urban spaces, right? Yeah. So there's another question. I feel video games which already have a kind of structure which depends on gamer and gameplay to complete or rather carry forward the story and play are particularly conducive to the discussion of poetics and agency. And I'm glad you mentioned our NPCs and agency. Do you think with games like Cyberpunk and in a limited way, even Black Mirror are changing the way we look at agency vis-a-vis NPCs, where the gamer's choice might really change which NPCs you interact with and which NPCs interact with you?
Hard one. Okay. Thank you. I think it's Zara, right? Asking that question, hard question. Okay. So I will disappoint you in the beginning when I say that I don't think that Cyberpunk 2077 makes much of a difference, to be honest. And when I think of a game, I also think about the text. When I think of text, I also think about the paratext. I can never play Cyberpunk without kind of imagining the number of the coercion that the workers, that the employees of CD Projekt have been, they have had to work 70-hour weeks during the pandemic, and now they're being held to ransom. All of that because it's such a buggy game. But regarding agency and NPCs, yes, of course, now more and more games are letting the non-player characters kind of interact with you. But nevertheless, I still think that there's a hero's journey type kind of, structure in these games. Even if you look at a game like Witcher or Cyberpunk, ultimately it's a hero. But of course, there are more questions that the hero is being made to ask, which is great for me because this is what the game medium actually allows. Right, here is Achilles, who kind of before he fights with Hector is kind of wandering 3 times. And that's what happens in Homer. Didn't happen in kind of doesn't happen in the Hollywood Achilles, where Brad Pitt, let's not even talk about him. And he just goes and shouts Hector, Hector, like a Bollywood movie, and then calls him out. And yeah, so these kind of subtleties are allowed in games, and these are actually kind of very important for games to think about. The ethics, the agency. I mean, I won't use the word agency, but choices. The moment you make a choice, you also have to think of the ethics of making that choice. Right, that's there, but where the gamer's choice might really change with NPCs you interact with and which NPCs interact with you. Yes, of course, but absolutely, the games should be more games should be introduced which do this. But at the same time, ultimately, it is kind of that very basic assumption that one kind of plays the game with, and I would say that in some parts of the world, people feel a little more entitled than other parts of the world, right? And my choice, therefore, is the choice. That confidence is something that I feel very difficult to, experience when I play. But that's personal.
Indrani is asking, you mentioned about the audience reactions pertaining to the missing video game. What were the kind of audience reactions to Kayamgad video game? Do these audience reactions and responsiveness open up the ethical space of agency?
Again, interesting question, Indrani. the Kayam Guard video game, the somewhere video game, and I don't even know what to call it. I should call it the Kayam Guard video game because he keeps changing the names, right? Because every time there's a new game that comes out, is one of absolute bewilderment. He confused the life out of the gamers. Really, is it a game? Is it even kind of going into one thing or another? What do we do about it? And sometimes it is just absolutely kind of like irritation, annoyance. Right. One of my students recently spoke about this game and existentialism. So I said that you're making your listeners kind of going through an existentialist crisis, really. Because, if you're speaking to hardcore gamers about a game like this, who are used to kind of taking guns and shooting down zombies, it's very, very off-putting and very, it creates a lot of problems because it makes you think about things that you don't, normally think about. And suddenly, when you kind of, just like I showed you with the other example, suddenly when instead of kind of the violence that you commit is not against a monster, an alien, which is kind of morally, you're kind of sensitized to kill, desensitized to kill, you suddenly kind of start eating your own building or a cemetery nearby. Yeah, changes the whole thing. Yeah. So yes, there are lots of disappointments with the game, but also lots of people who have interesting responses. And then I think I've also responded to the ethical notion as well, I think.
So I'll take one more question before we end. Some months ago, there was a big controversy about bullying culture involving a popular YouTube streamer, Carrie Minati, who had an argument with a TikTok user, Amir, and that turned communal in some ways and also brought out the hierarchy between YouTube and TikTok, where TikTok was considered a lesser or cheaper version of YouTube. Please comment. I have no idea what she's talking about. I'm sure you do.
I'll try to. It's not really related to gaming as such, but incidentally, because I'm also going to respond to Maya's comment here. She asked that I was really laughing. Why did TikTok get banned and what? I also asked the same question about PUBG. But not that I play PUBG myself. But anyway, but to talk about TikTok and the hierarchy between YouTube and TikTok, well, again, I mean, there are. This is a bigger question. I don't think I'm the right person to answer it, but I will try. Which is, I think actually Nirmala or Maya should answer this. But this is probably, I mean, what I feel is that TikTok is more immediate, and also it is how it is constructed. YouTube is used in academic courses as well in other places, and it's now kind of part of Google. So it's got that kind of level of gravitas, as it were, or you can do anything on YouTube, but it's kind of noted really that you can put academic stuff on YouTube and whatever. But TikTok was a little more kind of, shall we say, a little lowbrow in that sense, in the way it was constructed, also where it comes from, the origins really, the whole 10-cent kind of thing, and then what was being put on TikTok. You see, the same kind of technology can be used by YouTube, but TikTok just used the mobile phone technology. It tapped into it kind of in a more direct way, and it was more accessible for many people, and therefore all different kinds of videos came up. I mean, we are not streaming this on TikTok. I mean, TikTok is banned here, right? Sorry, but we wouldn't have been streaming it on one of those TikTok clones here. We're streaming these talks on YouTube because of that notion of gravitas, which has been built over time, really. So I think that is the hierarchy really of what the states, communities, the organic and the other kinds of intellectuals kind of decide on. I think that would kind of create that hierarchy. I think, yeah. I don't know if I've answered.
I just want to add to that, Souvik. I think TikTok has suffered the same fate as radio. In India, you still can't have a political conversation on radio, like a chat show, because it's truly accessible. It is the most democratic medium, actually, right? And TikTok being as accessible, no barrier to entry, a vertical, sort of shoot, everything worked for it. So obviously it was dangerous.
Yeah. and they know that whatever comes in place of TikTok will not take the place of TikTok, really, because
exactly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you all so much, and thanks to Maya and Souvik for a wonderful session. Both of them have given their emails, so if you have any further questions, I'm sure they won't mind you sending an email to them. So once again, thank you, Maya. Thank you, Souvik. It was lovely to see both of you.
Likewise, Nirmala and Maya. Okay, I'll put my email there as well, I think.
Yes, you do have it on that slide.
Oh, I do, yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Great.
You're immortalized on YouTube now, Souvik.
Okay.
Yes. So I'll hand it over to Nishat and their group.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you so much, Souvik sir and Maya ma'am. This was a wonderful, fascinating and intriguing session. We learned so much from, anti-archiving to, thinking about, choices, not simply leading to meaningful actions. I think so that also, opens up, the questions of thinking through our, politically and socially and culturally and regrouping ourselves, what do we really mean by digital and this digital divide that, besits our environment so much. Thank you so much. This was particularly a fascinating session for all of us here. Thank you so much, everyone. And I now hand over to Zara.
Thank you, Indrani, and thank you, Jubi, for being the rapporteurs for this session. And a huge thanks to our speakers and the chair. We've had a really great time, and no doubt we're all really hungry now because we've worked pretty hard. So this lunch break comes at the perfect time. We'll meet again at 3 o'clock for the next round of paper presentations. So I'll end the meeting right now, and we can join in 15 minutes before 3 to start that meeting then. See you all. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Souvik, and thanks, Maya.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.